A guy, now wielding immense power, felt a pang of dissatisfaction. Glancing at himself, he muttered, "Does this even make sense?" This body belonged to the young master of a demonic sect. But why had he, of all people, taken over? The most formidable villain among the wretched antagonists in a martial arts novel he'd written. Now, he was Hyok Rin-won, the fearsome young master of the demonic sect. Yet he still wondered why him. Reaching his estate, he pondered deeply, trying to steady himself. Then it hit him. His real name was Lee Si-woon. He was 32 years old. In his past life, he was an ordinary, law-abiding citizen of South Korea. Holding up a mirror, he questioned how a regular person could end up inside his own novel. Determined to unravel it, he felt certain something odd had occurred before this. One day, he decided to tidy his room. After finishing neatly, he declared he was done. Spotting a soda on the table, he decided to take a break. He'd recently moved into a new apartment. At that moment, his phone pinged with a message. Opening the news, he read that famous actress Sora had fallen into a coma after an accident. Frustrated, he didn't want to read anything. Yet news of Sora somehow reached him. After finishing his chores, he accidentally knocked over a steel box, spilling its contents. Among them was his laptop. Crouching, he stared at it, muttering that peace would never come to this world. Suddenly, something odd caught his eye. The laptop powered on by itself. He noticed a folder labeled Hero Lee Si-yoon. Leaning back, he pressed his chin proudly and shut his eyes. He resolved to ignore it, dismissing it as his embarrassing past. It was a martial arts short story he'd written a decade ago, likely still on a laptop. An hour later, curiosity won. He opened his unfinished martial arts novel, written during his student days, long ago. Then a notification popped up, urging him to return as a hero. Woon frowned, wondering what it meant. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. The laptop screen glowed blue, as if opening a portal before him. Woon couldn't escape. The portal swallowed him, pulling his body into the story. Now, he was Hyok Rin-won. Woon said that when he opened his eyes, he found himself transformed. But he questioned whether he retained Woon's memories as a novel character. Releasing his hands, he declared with resolve that he was now Hyok Rin-won, the fourth young master of the demonic sect. He was someone he'd loathed his entire life. He'd passed out and awoke here, unchanged, but a searing pain gripped his head, forcing him to clutch it. Woon was in such agony he could barely form words. He gasped, "What was that just now?" During the teleportation, he'd inherited Woon's old memories, where he appeared monstrous. He was always attacking elders and wishing them dead. Even that didn't stop him. He also reveled in drinking. Now, he felt his mind flooding with memories of how Woon lived his life. The pain was so intense, he feared his head might burst from the overwhelming influx. He saw clearly that Woon was truly a despicable person, relegated to a minor role in the story. Yet he was exactly the scum he'd envisioned. But now another issue arose. Before he could finish, a flashback hit, Woon slaughtering people. Despite being in a martial arts master's body, Woon was skilled at nothing. His sole purpose seemed to be dying at the protagonist's hands, clearing the path for the hero's rise. He was a villain destined to die at the novel's outset. But why had it come to this, Woon thought? He needed to act fast. Dying wasn't part of his plan. He had to find a way back to his world. Devising a strategy, he recalled that Woon was a young master of the demonic sect, despite being utterly useless. At least he held a status akin to a modern conglomerate heir or prince, with wealth and subordinates at his command. This gave him an edge in gathering information about returning home. Woon resolved to take action and absolutely refused to die. He set a firm goal to return to his world. Servants, startled by his shouts, whispered that the young master had lost his mind. Still clutching the mirror, Woon studied his reflection and admitted he looked wild. After further thought, he realized he'd overlooked another issue. Woon was pathetically weak in this story. He needed to master Mirim fighting techniques. Rising to his feet, he delved into his subconscious. Suddenly, he felt a surge of energy. Then he recalled, He possessed one of the heavenly sword techniques. Focusing inward, he resolved to try. As he trained, he sensed spiritual energy, qi, surging within him. Woon gathered enough qi and unleashed it. Opening his eyes, he saw he'd succeeded. But the thrill was short-lived. Mid-technique, his back locked up. Unable to hold on, he crashed to the ground, screaming so loudly the streets could hear. Lying there broken, he groaned that he was having seizures. The pain worsened, and overwhelmed, he yelled for help, demanding a doctor or healer. Then the door opened, and a servant entered, asking if the young master had called her. Glancing down, she saw the young master sprawled on the floor, his body looking as if crushed by a tractor. Terrified, the maid screamed in horror, fearing for the young master's life. After the chaos, a healer arrived, applying needles that left him feeble. Woon realized he'd nearly died. His untrained body couldn't handle advanced martial arts. Frustrated, he shouted, "Why couldn't this useless body manage something so basic?" Post-treatment, he recalled the heavenly chaotic destruction sword technique, a signature of the Hyakrin family, who birthed the most demonic cult leaders. This technique was notoriously hard to master, demanding vast reserves of internal qi. It also required profound understanding and precise execution of every movement. Woon noted that the body's previous owner had neglected training, failing to grasp even basic techniques. He never cultivated his inner qi, and his movements lacked finesse and elegance, making him a true weakling. For these reasons, Hyakrin Woon couldn't perform a single martial arts technique. Clutching his head, Woon wondered why he'd ended up in such a frail body. The next day, Woon chose to take a walk. He couldn't afford to sit idle. He needed a plan. He visited his clan's library, collecting books essential for his improvement. As he studied, he realized his luck. The books were written in Chinese characters he could read from his past life. He believed he could now learn more about the demonic cult. He discovered they didn't call themselves a demonic sect. They referred to their group as a divine cult, the divine cult of the sun and moon. During the Yuan dynasty, this cult gained fame among the oppressed Han people. They established strongholds in the Central Plains, aiding Zhu Yuanzhang's escape from Yuan rule. Zhu Yuanzhang toppled the Yuan dynasty, founding the Ming dynasty. Yet, wary of the divine sun and moon cult's power, he understood its threat. Early in his reign, he expelled them. They retreated to Xinjiang, far from the Central Plains. The surviving cult members barely clung to life. The third-generation leader harbored deep resentment toward the Central Plains for their exile. He amassed enough power to attempt a return to the Central Plains. But each advance was repelled by the Murim Alliance and the Imperial Army. Then Hyakrin Woon, the 15th leader, first conquered the western foreign region before deploying his main forces to the Central Plains. Now Woon understood why the body's former owner had to face the protagonist. It all came back to him. As the Heavenly Demon Festival approaches, Hyakrin Woon will reveal his plan to march on the Central Plains and name a successor. Exhausted, Woon muttered that he no longer knew who the successor would be, despite writing the novel himself. After the Heavenly Demon Festival, the chosen successor will lead the main forces to conquer the Central Plains. Hyakrin Woon, humiliated by his crushing loss in the successor contest, joined the main force to redeem his failure, heading to the Central Plains. There, he faced the protagonist, who only found Woon laughable. In the end, Woon perished with a single punch. Woon now realized he had just 2 years until the Heavenly Demon Festival. 2 years to grow stronger and avoid death by the protagonist's hand. Prepared to depart, Woon pondered how to achieve his goal. But he paused briefly, turned, and grabbed a large sheet of paper and ink to write something. He decided to jot down everything he recalled about the protagonist's journey first. It wasn't so simple. Woon sent a maid to summon the master to the manor. On the way, the master questioned her, asking if it was true the young master had called him to start training. The maid bowed her head and confirmed it was true. Shocked, the master remarked it was odd. The young master was certainly not the type to pursue such a thing. The maid chimed in, noting the oddest part was that upon waking, he was shouting words in a foreign tongue. He even grabbed paper and wrote for hours. The master, stunned, asked if the young master had learned to write. The maid, hiding nothing, confirmed it was true. The master stood frozen, unable to believe it. At the manor, the master dismissed the girl, warning her not to speak of the young master's behavior. Approaching the room, he hesitated. Perhaps the young master hadn't fully recovered. He braced himself, wondering how to handle Woon if he lashed out like a rabid dog again. Entering, the master asked if the boy had summoned him. Woon turned, greeting Elder Quan by name. Hearing this, Quan was shocked, thinking the young master had truly lost his mind. He braced for outburst, unable to believe such politeness. Before, Woon had always yelled and cursed, calling him a worthless old man, demanding he never appear again. Yet Woon, courteous, offered Elder Quan a chair. The master, stunned and cautious, couldn't process it. Woon, meanwhile, wondered how wild he must have been for mere politeness to leave Elder Quan so dazed. Quan asked the boy if he was in some trouble. Woon replied, was the elder only tasked with his care, or his finances too? Quan said he handled both. Woon pondered, asking how much money he could get from selling his possessions. Quan, concerned, asked if the young master was in trouble, offering to handle it for him. Woon assured the elder he knew what he was thinking, but insisted he had no issues. Curious, Quan asked why he suddenly wanted to know the value of his property. Woon said money was ammunition for all sorts of dirty deeds. Quan pressed, what kind of ammunition? The boy brushed it off, telling the elder to ignore it. That was the gist. Now, how much money did he have? Quan, sweating, asked what this was about. Woon mused that if someone died and returned, they'd reflect. What have they done wrong in life? Why hoard treasures if they're useless after death? Woon stood, ordering the elder to quickly convert all his assets into money. Quan, wary of angering him, didn't argue and said he understood the command. Un suddenly took his hands and said that he was relying on him for this matter then. And they also have a lot of work to do, so it would be really helpful if he started right away. And let them remember to keep records of their finances and treasures and how much they will get from the sale of each and specific item. As he left, Quan felt that even if the young master died and returned back to his body, he has this feeling as if he had become a completely different person. And he can't know if the young master's head is fine or not. A few days later in the morning, Un saw the treasure in front of him, and he said that he had only sold some things from his possessions, but he had gotten so much money. But he still wasn't sure if it would be enough for him to accurately carry out his survival plan. However, he still has 2 whole years left before the Heavenly Demon Festival begins. Unclosed the scroll and said that for his own sake, it was his responsibility to prepare a survival plan in these 2 years. And if you roughly estimate and translate Yuan's fortune into modern currency, he thinks you could accurately claim about 2 billion won. In principle, it's not bad, unthought, but it was still not enough for the moment. So he decided to take another closer look at the situation. The Heavenly Demon Festival would be in 2 years. And it is when the festival is over that the protagonist will emerge from his cave after years of training. Which means, for the moment, he's perfectly safe. However, he still remembered the memories of how the past owner of this body was thrown off the mountain. But he managed to survive such a fall and saw a cave near him that he decided to go into. But this cave was not simple. Someone had lived here before. There are objects scattered everywhere. And even that didn't stop him, because he had a plan to improve his skills. So he started training. Un said that after getting buffed the main character and becoming the strongest in the world, the standard and third-rate Miram story begins. But Guy decided to leave it at that, because while he had money, he should at least get everything ready for the next step, namely to go to the Heavenly Demon Library. After all, this is where all the martial arts books that the divine cult has accumulated over the years are kept. And now he needs to learn martial arts to at least save his life. Stopping in front of the door, a strong and huge guard opened the doors to the main library for him. Un looked at it and said that there were fewer books than he had imagined. But even so, it's better for him. It wouldn't take so much time. Un immediately started looking for a book, and After gathering a stack of books, he said he had finally found everything he needed. After looking at the books, he picked up the technique of saving a life through meditation. And according to the hero's journey, this technique enhances the feelings of the one who uses it. That's exactly what he needed most right now. Why was he only finding out about her now? Unthought. Un began to read and realized that those who learn the technique of saving life through meditation acquire a superior sixth sense. He would be able to dodge attacks and take full advantage of his opponent's opening. Besides, when he would master this technique perfectly, and not only would he be able to sense the strength and emotional state of his opponent, but he would also be able to see traps and ambushes. And that is truly a cheater skill. Un read the whole book and said that he should learn this technique right now, when as the protagonist of the novella will only learn it in the middle of the hero's journey. And only then will he become much stronger. In other words, he will now be the only one who will own this cheater technique. And the mere fact that he's doing so greatly increases his chances of survival. And since someday the protagonist will also learn this technique, he will definitely die at his hands by then. But suddenly looking closer, he saw with the corner of his eye that there were 2 more books. This is the Scaly Armor Technique and the 9 Divine Moons Art. Unread, and said that the Scaled Armor Technique increases defense to the point where one can block a sword attack without even wearing armor. And it would be a sin not to mention the effect of a 9 Divine Moons Art, which is a 9-fold increase in strength. Un started shouting that he could build an indestructible martial arts foundation with all of this. Exactly what he needed so badly. The boy rejoiced and said that at last he was sure to survive. And it was time for him to start his training. On the evening of the weekend, the festivities began, and a bunch of people gathered at an establishment, and a guy asked Dan Pan if he'd heard about the recent rumors. Dan Pan asked, did he mean that there was anything even more absurd than their own crazy idiot, Renan, that supposedly rose from the dead? The guy said he had no doubts. Un is definitely a fucking psycho. But rumor has it that his crazy has changed somehow, and it's unclear which way it's going. Dan Pan asked in what sense was somehow changed. The guy replied that when he heard the rumor that he had woken up, the first thing he decided to do was to visit him. Then he was at the Western Manor. But on the way something happened that he did not expect at all. Some servant stopped him and said that the young master was very busy at the moment. He would call him when he was completely free. Dan Pan got curious and asked what he could be doing besides drinking booze and throwing another tantrum. The boy replied to Pan that he wouldn't believe it, for that's exactly what he thought. So he decided to check with his own eyes what he was so busy doing. Eventually found out that Un had locked himself in the Heavenly Demon Library. He still hasn't come out. He's been there for days. Dan Pan started laughing and said that Scum and Chief Bully Un can also read. Is he really thinking about leaving their gang of 4 heavens and making his own gang? The guy says it's just speculation. But does Dan Pan think he's going to participate in a celestial demon festival? Dan Peng couldn't help himself after saying that, and told the guy that very good joke. And now he swears that if Un really joins the battle and succeeds, he will become a slave. And everyone here will be witnesses. The boy told Brother Mock that no one was pulling his tongue. He would not get away with it again. The kid thought that Brother Dan Peng was not at all confident in one's victory since he had made such a high bet. Un had been in the library all this time, studying the martial arts techniques he would need. But suddenly he took hold of his ear because he saw that it wouldn't go away. And apparently someone is saying bad things about him. That said, instead of trying to learn on his own, it would be easier to learn martial arts if he had a teacher. But Un couldn't lie in the library for long. After all, he had already spent enough time here and it was time for him to get some rest. Un suddenly thought that since he remembered about the teacher, it was a good time for him to call for one and ran after him. The boy thought, why didn't he think of this before? And at that time, Elder Quan walked by the library. Un told the elder that he had finally found him. He immediately gave him a list and told him to bring all the people here according to the list, and preferably quickly. Quan looked at the list and asked who all of them were. Un answered proudly and loudly that they were his teachers. Elder Quan asked with surprise, teachers? Un answered him to just bring them here and have him direct them to his personal training area. Quan asked the Lord Is he talking about that pile of garbage? But Quan realized that he had said a lot of unnecessary things and immediately covered his mouth with his hands. Unthought that the scum was an old master behind the scum, that he didn't even bother to clean up his personal training area. Undecided to ask, and how long would it take to clean up the training area, and how long before it would be completely ready for use? Quan replied that he thought, under his guidance, they could do it in one day. So as early as tomorrow morning, the master would be able to use it. Unrejoiced, and wished them good luck. But suddenly he smelled a strange odor. As he sniffed himself, he realized he stank, and he thought he hadn't bathed since he'd locked himself in the library. And now he must go to his estate and take a bath. When evening came, he went into the bath and relaxed, and said that it was as if he had been reborn. But looking up, he saw a girl who told him that they had come to rub his back. Un did not lick them and replied that he was grateful for it, but that he would refuse this time. He told them to leave, for he could do it himself. The girl was surprised and asked the master why he was kicking them out. Un answered them again that he told them to get out of here. Or can't they understand in a nice way? The girls were greatly surprised and did not recognize their master. But Una's nerves were frayed, and he started shouting at them to leave immediately. After his bath, Un came to his room and thought about how he could enjoy his life when it was on the line. After looking at the records, he said he wanted to survive and return to his home world. He needed a plan as reliable as a Swiss watch. But suddenly, a servant came and told the fourth young master, 100 Secretary Jiang Murian had arrived. One ordered him to call him here right away. But Jiang Murian thought, why on earth would a freaking divine cult lunatic summon him for a private conversation? I wonder if he's got some dirty dirt on him. And now he hoped he hadn't. But he needs to think about what a humble scholar pushing paper in the demonic heaven pavilion for the fourth young master could do. In fact, Murian remembered that he had heard that Un indulged in all sorts of rich luxuries. But then why is it that he sees only books and some documentation here? Un turned to Secretary Murian and apologized for the mess in his room, and he preferred to meet him in person. And so he apologizes for tearing him away from any important business. Murian felt uncomfortable and told the gentleman to raise his head. And why is he being so polite to him? And he's being overly courteous to him. And now he asks the gentleman to speak to him carelessly. And if it continues like this, he won't be able to handle the mental stress caused by such courteous behavior. Un thought for a moment and told the secretary that he would speak to him as he had asked. And he himself even realized that it was somehow awkward. Un said he guesses the secretary is wondering why exactly he called him here. But the thing is, he had heard rumors that he was well-versed in specific martial arts. Murian was shocked and asked the gentleman, did he say anything about martial arts? Un immediately put a book on the table titled Methods of Long-Lasting Meditation Introduction. Un said he knows that the method of long-lasting meditation is not some simple book for a beginner in this field. It contains many advanced theories. They shouldn't underestimate any of the martial arts techniques just because of their simplicity, right? Murian asked the Lord what exactly he needed from him. Un replied that Secretary Jiang Murian, one of those who had written the most detailed instruction manual, the first martial arts that all members of the divine cult were required to learn, namely, the method of long-lasting meditation. Though he had read his book, his understanding barely covered the surface of the method itself. And that's why he wants Murian to train him personally. Murian suddenly got scared and told the fourth young master that he shouldn't tell him that. And how is he even capable of teaching anything? Un replied to the secretary that he was willing to bet that the rumors about him had already reached him too, right? Murian replied that yes, he is. They say he's the weakest cult member in history, and that he intimidates those weaker than him while attacking those stronger than him, and that the Lord drowns in alcohol and chases every skirt. But Murian suddenly realized that he had said too much and closed his mouth. Un saw this and said there was no need to worry. It's all right, and he wants to get stronger anyway, but he's concerned about the divine cult's focus on quickly mastering martial arts. And he also believes that building a strong foundation is more important than speed. As the saying goes, a tree with a thin trunk breaks easily. Miriam started shouting to the master that he completely agreed with him. Un saw that the secretary was caught not only on the hook, but also on the line and even on the sinker. And now it was time for the final blow. Un decided to say that he had actually heard a lot of people saying as if his opinion was very similar to the train of thought of the Orthodox sects. And no one in his sect will be able to accept him. And that's why he's so worried. And he feels terrible that he's starting to go against the ideals and goals of his cult. Miriam was listening to the Lord at this moment and was completely polite to him, and even his heart became anxious. But Un saw it immediately and wondered if he had overdone it. After all, the secretary's face was covered with tears. Miriam said that due to the lack of balance in the martial arts of their divine cult, he had built his own martial arts. However, no one had recognized them yet. And yet, that martial art that is already out there and recognized carries the same meaning as his. But it's incredible. Who would have thought that their fourth young master would be the one who would be the one to understand the full meaning of his theory that he had invested his entire life into? But Un said he wasn't sure how far he was even willing to go. But Miriam couldn't stand it and fell to his knees in front of the young master and asked him to punish him, his disobedient servant, for failing to discern their true nature and for trusting in some unfathomable and unfounded rumor about him. Un raised the secretary and told him not to worry. After all, he is an indispensable member of their divine cult. So he could work together with his young master so that they could improve the martial arts of their divine cult together, and offered him to build a new future. Miriam said that if he could help his master in any way, that he vowed to put the rest of his life on it, and thanked his master for the honor, the fourth young master. Or rather, his master. Un was shocked that it had turned out even better than he had expected. But who would have thought he would be so emotionally torn? And he thinks there are too many thoughts swirling around in Miriam's head right now that he regrets. And to be honest, there's another reason why he chose Secretary Jiang as his personal mentor. Jiang Miriam is actually the greatest hero in the hero's journey. Someone who is summoned by a demonic tactician. And if he takes over his training, his chances of survival will increase several times over. In the evening, one wrote in the book that Jiang Miriam had been successfully recruited. And what a good start. He had already managed to recruit the demonic tactician, Miriam. He is one of the greatest geniuses of the hero's journey. After the second young master chose him as his partner, he provided invaluable assistance to trap the protagonist. He was nicknamed the demonic tactician for this incident. And after the protagonist's rival, the second young master becomes the successor of the demonic cult. He also turns out to be a significant figure who plays a major role in the war against the Murima alliance. And as for the Triple Kingdom, Liu Bei only got Zhuge Liang, and he wrote it all by himself. It's not nice to praise himself, but who wouldn't call this script brilliant anyway? Un lay down on the bed and wondered what his next move would be, but he decided that he would do it later because he was terribly sleepy. Upon arriving at the training room, Miriam asked the gentleman what it was. Un replied that he would be his personal martial arts mentor from today, and these are the materials that will help him make progress faster and more efficiently. Miriam told the gentleman that he did not deny that they must have depicted systematic and regular training, but they all just detail the basics of physical fitness, what to eat and how to rest, and how much sleep does he get after the sleep technique. And frankly, I've never seen this kind of technique before. Un replied that he had found some flaws in the systematic basic training of their divine cult, so he decided that he would deal with these problems in the coming days. But still, isn't the foundation of the basics nutrition? As they say, it is what one consumes in food. And then there's exercise and proper sleep. Miriam listened to the gentleman and said that it was great, and the fact that all martial arts ultimately originate from the human body. And the part that he, the one who had spent decades practicing martial arts, had overlooked was completely filled in by him, the one who had been an asshole until yesterday. But Un thought that really, he was just making these plans based on the exercise and diet of a regular gym in their time. Who would have thought he would buy into it? Undecided, and told the secretary to start studying this method together and find a way to improve the martial arts of their divine cult. When he started training, Miriam would control his technique and tell him to lift his ass higher during the exercise. After push-ups, they went straight to pull-ups on the bar, and he was even pretty good at it. Miriam kept walking beside him and telling his master to survive everything and lift the dumbbells one last time. Unrealized that he had been training according to modern techniques for 2 weeks, and what he had already achieved was beyond gratifying. But he doesn't know what it's about, that he's by lineage the son of a cult leader, and he's lucky with his genetics. But he's already seeing the results. Suddenly, Miriam shouted to the gentleman to do it now, and there was one last stage left. Un replied that he was damn right. Un saw during training that Miriam was changing his training method to match his martial arts training. Just as he expected, Hakrin Woon is getting stronger every day, and his plan is still working. But a guy came in front of the gate and, hearing strange noises, asked what Un was really doing there. But usually when Un deals with his business, the first thing he does is crawl into some brothel. The boy turned to the old man and asked if the fourth young master was inside. Quan replied that the young master was currently practicing. The guy was very surprised and asked, "Is he really practicing?" I guess he didn't overhear. Did he say that this Un is practicing? Quan replied that this was correct. It had been about 2 weeks since the young master started his training. The guy was sweating at this moment. After all, he had never seen this brat at training. Even when they went to the Heavenly Demon Pavilion where they studied martial arts. Maybe he was crazy or something else. The guy didn't believe it and said it couldn't be. He probably does it to build up his muscles so that girls will like him more. Quan replied that the young master is really training. If the guy doesn't believe it, let him follow him to the training ground. At this moment, Miriam and Un were practicing. He told the Lord that his martial arts were showing themselves better and better each time. Un smiled and asked the secretary, did he think so? But then a guy walked in and asked them, what's going on here anyway? Un turned around and asked Sangwon Hu, what is he doing here? He knew that this guy was a member of the 4 divine gangs. He stays away from them, as their effectiveness in improving his chances of survival is non-existent. But he hadn't anticipated at all that one of them would drop right in on him. Who asked the guy what he was doing? And why did it take him so long to come to them, to socialize, to build a relationship? Un asked him back, can't he see for himself? He's too busy practicing. Who asked the gentleman what he was carrying? Had his head not yet fully recovered from being resurrected and brought back to life? Un thought, what kind of brat did they think the previous owner of this body was to be so strangely concerned about him? Who asked, is he definitely the Hecarin Un he really knows? Even the expression on his face had changed since the last time they saw him. He didn't have someone else living in his body, did he? Un saw that this guy was smart, but told him that if he keeps talking nonsense, he can leave. He doesn't have much free time. Who asked the gentleman where he was going in such a hurry? Un replied that after he was resurrected and came back to life, he immediately began to regret his past. He decided that if he was given a new chance, he would take it to the fullest and live the life he wanted. One asked him immediately, did he understand what he wanted to convey? And turned around and told Secretary Jiang that they could make another approach. Seeing Murian Yuan's secretary, he realized that they were overtraining. And kind of think of it, this guy looks pretty stocky too. Un thought that maybe he should use Hu as his sparring partner. And with his speed, he pounced on him with his attacks. Hu did not expect this turn of events and asked with a frightened face, what is Un trying to do? Un got very close to him and made a punch with his hand, but Hu was a little faster and dodged his punch. Hu didn't get very close to him and stepped back a distance. But Un was shocked that the guy was able to react. Hu shouted at him to stop, for he didn't want to wave his hands. But Un didn't hear him and decided to attack again. But again, Hu was able to get his head to the side and dodged Yuan's fist. But Hu got tired of dodging the guy's attacks and adopted a boxer's stance. Un asked him if he was okay. Un told Hu that it's been a long time since he's fought a trained opponent like him, right? And if he wants to get stronger so he doesn't get his ass kicked, how about we train together? Hu didn't expect such an offer and asked with surprise, training? Un answered him, how about working for him, or rather training with him for a month? A good chance to pick himself up again. Hu asked the guy right away if he was serious. Is he completely crazy? Un pointed his finger and replied that it was only for 1 month. If he became a training partner, he would give him his blue horse that he wanted so badly to take for himself. Who was shocked and asked the guy if he was cheating. Un gave him a look and replied that he was dead serious as hell, saying when Hu has been giving Un a nightmare throughout. No matter where he went, he would still make him suffer. The next day, Hu had already started training together, but he was so exhausted that he could hardly breathe. Hu slowly told Un that he was just an asshole. Un was running ahead at this moment and replied to him that he was right in front of him. Hu was already dissatisfied and asked, what kind of workout was this? He had never practiced like this before, and none of his acquaintances had either. Murian replied to the guy that it was simple. Her main goal is to increase his physical strength, thereby increasing his inner strength. Hu immediately turned to the secretary and asked what the hell was this. But Un shouted that he was still ahead of him. But it suddenly occurred to Hun, and he remembered that everything was correct, that he and Un were both from high-ranking families. From childhood, they were forced to study a special program and take various medical subjects. But none of the programs were aimed at improving basic physical strength. But if Un does manage to form basic physical strength, then the effects of special programs and medical drugs will give him many advantages in growth. And if at that point you compare their strengths between them, there will be a gulf. Suddenly, Murian blew his whistle and said that the training session was over. Hu was exhausted at this point and said he almost died. Un turned to him and asked if it was worth it. Hu tried to say something, but Murian blew his whistle and said Hu's mother, you need to run 5 more laps. Hu was very angry and didn't even want to run, but his pride was higher and he ran. And Un shouted to him to try harder. But Hu at the moment of running represented the very blue horse he wanted to get earlier, and for her sake he would do it. Un kept saying that 1 month he would just have to be patient. Just let the blue horse wait for him. Un looked at the book and said that the result was better than he expected. Murian replied that he had a question. Could they use this technique on the most ordinary warriors? Un looked at Hu and replied that they could. They have 1 lab rat here anyway. In 1 month, and they would find out the answer to his question. After a month of training, Hu could no longer tolerate all the humiliation, but for the sake of the horse, he still held on. Un asked the secretary if he had arranged all the dates he had asked him for. Murian replied that he had. They already have everything arranged so that the regular warriors will be able to start training soon. But after seeing Hu just pass out during practice, they didn't even expect things to turn out this way. Hu said in a slow and squeaky voice that a month had already passed, and he was waiting for his blue horse. Un replied that the boy was right, and he had been working hard all this month, and he's used to keeping his word, and he's letting him take his blue horse. But suddenly Hu jumped up and shouted a 1. He suddenly asked him if he was possessed by someone else, even though he was a little different from what he once was, but still. Un actually realized that the guy was right. But even if he told him everything, he still wouldn't believe him. Hu said that Un is acting so weird because he wants to take the winner's spot in the competition. Un replied to the boy that he was probably right. Hu was surprised and asked him if he was serious. Un replied, is this the time to joke around? After all, he is one of the first in line for the inheritance. Hu started shaking the guy and told him to watch what he said. If those words reach his brother's ears, he himself knows exactly what will happen. They're going to come running to get rid of him, aren't they? Hu started asking him to forget. He doesn't need this position as the heir of the divine cult. After all, they can just enjoy life. And there are tons of things in the world that are much better than practicing. Un looked over and wondered if he was imagining things. This guy is really worried about him. He wasn't even one of the main characters in the novel, but somehow he was beginning to trust him. Maybe he should tell him everything, Un thought. I turned to Hu and even called him a dear friend, and said that he really thought that joining the competition at the festival for the sake of success was a good idea. Hu didn't take it all in and shouted at him, asking if he was crazy. Un replied that yes, he was crazy, but he wasn't sure. That's why he wanted to ask him to help him with his training. Hu was shocked and asked him what he meant. Un replied that he was trying to change the absurdity of a divine cult that focused all its attention on the eldest son. Let Hu just think thanks to just this absurdity, the younger sons get along with each other and join different gangs to live life to the fullest and have fun, right? Who replied, that's right. The younger sons in their sect have nothing to do but to engage in such things. Un said that's why he wants to change this absurdity. Of course, it's going to be very difficult. To accomplish this, they must succeed in this competition. And he needs a comrade who will worry about him more than his own life. And he sees him who as that comrade. He believes he can rely on his help. Who believed his words and offered to make a new divine cult together where there would be no discrimination. And now, Un actually didn't even have to worry. He could definitely rely on his help. Un saw that he had gone too far again. For the guy had cried. Un suddenly thought, was it really because of the people in the past? Or is it because he's in a martial arts novel? Why is everyone so emotional? But that would only benefit his plan. Un tells the guy that he thanks his best friend, and he's so glad he can count on him, and who thanked him back for thinking well of him, who got curious and asked what they should do next. He is well aware of how Un feels, but he has no idea how they are going to win the competition. Un replied to his friend that he needed him to help him with something first. Who told his friend to just say the word and it would be done. In the evening, Un heads to his safe and says that Who is more useful than he thought. He can't get rid of jewelry that's too expensive, but since he was able to use his connections to sell it, there's at least 10 billion won here now. But he wondered how the previous owner of this body had managed to siphon so much money from his relatives. But now that everything was ready, it was time to move on to the next part of the plan. The next morning, they immediately started practicing fist fighting with Who. They practiced slow strikes on each other and try not to hurt each other. But suddenly Who switched to a contact fight and landed a strong leg kick. Un dodged it and said great move. Who asked his friend, was this really all he could do? But one immediately picked up speed for his attack and delivered the strongest punch with his fist. Who didn't even have time to see that punch and got hit in the head. And then he got upset and said that he would never win against him, and suggested that he should rest for a while. Un replied to him that he could rest for a while, and continued practicing his kicks in the air. Who told his friend that no matter how many times he looked at him, he still couldn't believe it. If he did the same thing in the Divine Demon Pavilion, he would be considered the best. Un replied that he had been busy having fun back then. But suddenly Who remembered and told his friend that he was considered a martial arts genius from the heavens themselves when he was young. Wasn't he? Un thought for a bit and immediately remembered his youth, how during that time he trained and didn't even rest. And his mother was always by his side, watching his favorite son toil each day. Even when he was involved in fights between his opponents, he was the best and knocked them out with one punch. And then he looked at his parents, who said he was a true martial arts genius from a divine cult. And just like the second coming of the divine demon, Un always cheered in those moments when his parents praised him and couldn't even hide his smile. But a little later his mother died, and all the people in the cult mourned her death. They even escorted her to the cemetery for the saints. But Un could not bear the death of his mother, and he mourned her body that day. And since then, he fell into the void and lost all his passion for martial arts. He did everything small-mindedly, didn't exert himself in life, bullied the weak, and had only the chung of the gang of four heavens in his entourage in the company of girls and alcohol. But after he, Li Si Woon, took over his body, his emptiness turned into survival, and now the real Un has returned. And now he has to come back too. And his training is the only chance he has to get back on his feet. Who heard the guy mumbling and asked him what he was saying there? Un replied that it was just thinking out loud. Suddenly, he remembered and said that he wanted to ask him for one more favor. Who asked what kind of favor? Un replied that he wanted him to introduce him to someone. Who asked to whom? But one didn't say his name out loud and slowly whispered directly into his ear. But the look on Who's face was clear that the guy's head had collapsed. Un replied that that was correct. In fact, the Divine Wolf Group is one of the three key fighting forces in the Divine Sun and Moon cult. She is the strongest unit that gathers the strongest members of the Divine cult. And the best archer of the Divine Wolf Group is Sabu's son. In the evening, Sun came to town and was glad that who had written to him. After all, it had been several years since their graduation from the Divine Demon Pavilion. But he wondered why he had invited him to such a fancy inn. Surely he must know of his humble origins. But arriving at the door, who suddenly opened the door and said hello to him, and told him that they hadn't seen each other for a very long time. Sun saw that who might know. Then he was not a man who cared about prestige and riches. Sun told the guy he was totally right and asked how long had it been since they had seen each other. And also, how did who get in such shape? Didn't he say to exercise in moderation? Who replied that he did. But suddenly Un appeared and told Sun that they hadn't seen each other for a long time either. Sun was shocked to see Una beside him, and even froze for a moment. He felt a shiver run through his body. Who saw the guest's face and immediately said that he knew it would happen. Un also opened half of his eye and saw that Sun was already on the peak to explode. Un thought, what is this murderous attitude, and is he going to die before the main character kills him? But he kept remembering that Un had often bullied Sun in those 4 years while they were at the Divine Demon Academy. Un beat him up that day and said he was a pathetic foreigner. After all, he can't even block such a weak punch. A little while later, they got into another altercation and Un bullied him in a way that only he wanted. But Un didn't feel sorry for him and threw a silver coin at his feet. But lastly, he said that he was only helping the beggar, and Sun wanted to hit the leader's son. Un told him to take the coin, or he would hold a grudge all his life. Sun had endured the humiliation all this time, for he could not return the favor. But Sun needed that money and decided not to be proud and take it. But that day who came to him and said that Un had humiliated him again. Sun stood up and said that when he was done learning, he would make Un, the freak, disappear out of sight. And also when he finishes his studies, he will become a member of the serious group, a respected sect of the Divine Demon, and will have the ability to challenge anyone to a duel. And when that moment comes, he will beat him to death, returning his long-awaited debt. And now the day had come, and Sun could not contain himself, because he wanted to fulfill his promise that he had made years ago. Sun asked him, does he really want his wish to come true today, or is he still looking for someone to play his game with? Who stopped him and told him to listen to him first. But Sun didn't listen to him and immediately attacked down with his fists. But Un realized that he was very much to blame in front of him and fell to his knees. And Sun looked at him as he had then before. He stared at him. Sun was surprised at this and said that Yuan's game had gotten even funnier. Un replied to him that he knew that bowing down to someone meant admitting defeat in the Divine Demon sect. Sun replied that he doesn't care about his adulation, but what does he want to do? Un says that he is fully aware of why he is acting like this, but he wants Sun to listen to him first. Sun didn't understand anything and said what a foolish thing to say. But there was only one way he agreed. If Un would survive his triad Chuzik, he would listen to him, who immediately saw that Sun had lost his mind. After all, how could he deal with a triad expert of the serious group, the strongest in the Divine Demon sect? Un stood up and thanked him for such an offer. Sun immediately attacked him, but the boy fell down and dodged his attack. Un immediately felt that if Sun hit, it would hurt a lot, and now he only had to dodge the blows. But Sun could not stop his anger, for all his humiliation was still in his soul. But Un understood him and only dodged the blows. Seeing Sun's full power, he was even a little scared. After all, the guy had grown a lot in his strength. But suddenly Sun reached out sharply and grabbed Un by his clothes. He said one last time, "There he goes." Without thinking for long, Sun lifted Una into the air, and with all his strength, sealed him right onto the floor and held him. Un felt the power of this guy on his body. But Sun didn't stop, and, charging his fist, shouted that he was finished. Una had no chance left to dodge and had to take it all on his head. After this blow, Sun and calmed down, but who began to panic for his friend and shouted. But it turned out to be much more surprising. Un managed to put up his defense and didn't even get a scratch. Sun was shocked by this and thought, when did this rascal have time to learn this? Un opened his hand and offered to chat for a while. Sun let him go and said he had exactly 1 minute. Who also entered the conversation and told Sun that since the promise of the triad was over, let him listen to them and get right to the point. Un looked at his hand and realized that he was just lucky to have blocked his punch. Upon sitting down at the negotiation table, Un immediately told Sun that he needed his power. Sev told the guy that he didn't know what he was talking about. Un replied that in the Divine Wolf unit, all the warriors use swords and spears as their main weapons. But as he knows, Sun just isn't a member of that clan. Sev said to the guy, "Is he implying that the bow as a weapon is contrary to Mu Gong and only cowards use it?" Un replied that yes, and he needed to master the skill of using it right now. Sev didn't expect that and became very angry. Sev told the guy that you can scoop the bullshit he's talking out of his mouth in buckets. Un replied to him that when he said skill, he didn't mean anything bad. He had just misunderstood him slightly. In a divine demonic sect, one is always looking for an opportunity to gain supremacy. Swords and other melee weapons are considered good tools to achieve this goal, and they are wielded by warriors, and they look down on ordinary archers because the way they keep their enemies in check is not superiority. And now he believes that Sin's skill is very useful, and it can be used to dominate the battlefield. Sun was totally shocked by this and asked him for a moment. But lastly, Un asked him if he wanted his talent to rot away. Sun replied that he wanted it very badly. Un said that he plans to create the strongest unit of archers in their distressed cult, and it will be even more powerful than his group. And on top of that, he wants to put him in charge of this unit. Sun immediately stood up and froze. Sun got angry and asked Una, is he still looking down on him? I mean, he's going to keep on bullying him. Over and over again. Un didn't talk to him for long and showed him some boxes. Sev walked over and asked, "What are these?" Un replied that he had some money, and if he agreed to give him 3 cases. Sev got angry and grabbed Una by his clothes, asking how much longer would his bullying of him continue. Un replied, so he wouldn't misunderstand him. His current goal is not to bully him. He really wants to create the strongest archery unit. And among all the people he knows, there is no one who has such an immense talent in wielding a bow as he has. And that's why he took the risk of inviting him here. He's about to become the successor to a demonic sect. Sev thought and told Un that he was just a regular idiot, who had always been a crazy moron. Un replied that it was exactly like that. And since he had long since been enlisted as a lunatic, he should do everything as clearly as possible. But suddenly Hu told him that he wasn't just a crazy retard. Un was surprised and asked, then who is? Hu replied to him that he was just a full-on jackass. Sin noticed that this was true, and those eyes no longer those empty eyes that they were during the Divine Demon Academy. And now as he sees it, those eyes contain unwavering determination. Sev thought for a moment and sat down at the conference table. Un also sat down and asked him, did he finally change his mind? Sun replied that yes, he had. But let him know, it wasn't because of the gold he offered him. He has heard that after people die and come back to life, their character changes. And he only agrees because he has sparked an interest in him, and he wants to keep watching him. Un raised his drink and answered him that he understood. And now they could drink to their cooperation. After talking for a bit, Sun said that it didn't matter to him. No matter how much he puzzled over it, he still found it hard to believe. And now he's telling Un about the offer he made him today. Un replies to the guy that he knows exactly what he means, and he sincerely regrets what happened during his time at the academy. He was young and stupid. Sun said that the thing was that he didn't fully trust him yet. Un asked, then, what should he do to gain his trust? Sun replied that he should learn archery from him, to shoot arrows in perfect trajectories. Un asked in surprise, what was the guy talking about? Sun immediately realized that, as he thought, such a horrible person couldn't just change. The next day, they started practicing, and Sun showed him how to shoot a bow. Un looked and said that he had never seen anyone who used a bow possess even a modicum of the qualities characteristic of a real man. Un remembered how he had mocked him before, and even asked him how he was doing with those cases, or did he no longer have a hard-on? But Sun ignored them and practiced all the time. Even when he was about 10 years old, he was already a good shot. His father trained and taught him all the time. And when Sun learned to shoot, he was very happy and told his father that it was great. Sun remembered that his father was the first archer in the Divine Demon sect. Bows were his father's pride. and so was he. And Un has always looked down on him, insulting him for having a bow as his main weapon. But why is he looking at him right now with a strained smile on his face? Un asked. All he had to do was do that. And to be honest, he was planning on asking him to teach him archery himself. And then Sun can take care of him. Let him teach him archery. Sun asked him, is he serious now? Un replied that of course. Sun was happy about that and picked up a bottle of vodka and started drinking. Sun drank all the alcohol and said that now was the time and would now show him the ins and outs of using a bow. But Sun went a little overboard and, taking the alcohol, told Yinu to drink with him too and drink to the bottom. Un immediately grabbed it and replied no questions asked. And with a hiccup, he lifted the jug of alcohol. He looked at all this and was glad that everything was going well. Un turned to him afterward and said that he should have a bottle too, who was adamantly against it, and said that they knew he had a weakness for alcohol. But the guys didn't listen to him and started to drink him. Un started yelling that they were going to drink until they died tonight. The next morning they were barely alive and sleeping who fell where. Sun woke up early of all, and opening his eyes saw that he was still asleep. But it was the headache that tormented him the most. He couldn't even say a word. But when he saw the box, he began to remember the night before. They started fighting with Woon, and who was drinking the whole time and saying they needed to stop for a while. Sun started pouring his heart out to Un and said that he didn't realize how much he had suffered because of him. Un replied that he had already said he was sorry about it. Sun asked the guy if he wanted to create a unit of archers, and now he's mentally ill. Sun realized that it didn't matter if he had changed or not, and how strong it was. But Un is still the fourth young master of the divine cult. He must have lost his temper a little, but the fact that he drank a lot of alcohol and his character didn't change. In the morning, a maid came in and asked the gentlemen if they were awake yet. She prepared food and clothes. Sun replied that he was thankful, but first he needs to see the fourth young master. The maid replied that he was on the training ground at the moment. He's practicing with a bow, if he's not mistaken. But Sun was surprised and asked her if she had said he was practicing with a bow. The maid replied that he was asking the master to follow her. At this time on the training ground, Un was practicing with his bow, but failed to hit the target every time. Un immediately turned around and asked Sun how he had slept. The boy replied that it wasn't bad overall. Un said that he decided to start practicing with the bow by himself. But there's no progress on that. And can he give some tips? Un took aim and said that he believes even his stance is already wrong. Sun replied that it wasn't. This stance is used during hunting, so he wouldn't call it wrong. Un began to laugh and said, as expected of a devil archer, he had just studied it during the great hunt. Sun answered him that he was happy for him. But what kind of devil archer? Un replied that it didn't matter. Let him better show him how to shoot it properly. Sun didn't hesitate and immediately took aim with his bow. Un looked at it all and saw that it was not bad. Sun immediately released an arrow from his bow, and aiming the arrow was so fast that it couldn't even be seen. But at the end, the arrow hit the target. Un looked at the board and was shocked by what he saw. He even started clapping Sun and saying that it was awesome. Sun asked the guy, did he know that hunting and attacking someone were two different things? If he practiced, he could shoot better. Un replied that was fine, and then let Sun teach him. Sun said that he has a joint training session with the Divine Wolf group in the afternoon, so they better get busy training him as soon as it's over. Un replied that there was no need for that, and they would start right now because he wouldn't have to go to a joint training session with them. Sun asked him why he thought that. Un asked him in response, did he forget that he had made a contract with him yesterday? It said that he would leave the Divine Wolf group and join the unit he was going to create. Sun remembered everything and how Un had told him to sign, and they would continue drinking further. Un brought the document and said that this contract was his. Let him take it. Sun looked at it and was shocked. He even asked if it was okay to put him too big a down payment and a huge salary. According to this contract, his current salary was 10 times the salary he received in Divine Wolf. Un asked in response, should he have to explain such simple things to him? The most talented people should be appropriately rewarded for their services. And there are also a lot of other social benefits out there as well, so have him peruse them. Also, he has already ordered the boxes of gold to be delivered to his house, because they are quite heavy. He couldn't have done it alone, so he's counting on him. They will work together for the future of the divine cult. Un saw the look in his eyes and noticed that everything was going according to plan. He had gotten his hands on the best archer in the novel, who would be called the Devil's Archer. The Devil Archer is someone who could be the left hand of the second young mastermind, who worked alongside the demonic tactician to get the protagonist into a lot of trouble. Before Sun was called that, the protagonist had already killed Un. In the end, they had no contact with each other in the novel. He had no idea that he had suffered so much, especially in a setting that he hadn't even written at all. It had all worked itself out. And according to the plot of the novella, after the second young master becomes the successor of the demonic cult, he will build up his own strength and create a unit of archers called the Demonic Archer Unit. This is to better prepare for the war against the Murima Alliance. And in that unit, Sun was elected as the leader. But because he suddenly wanted to create an archery unit despite having no power or influence, and his unit of archers wouldn't have the same destructive power as the second young master. But suddenly he saw that it wasn't just about the archery unit. He needed the strongest special unit possible, one that could do anything. The next morning, Un sat by the window and drank tea. But he thought, how is he going to form a special unit? But suddenly someone knocked, and Hu and Sun entered. Un told them to come in and asked how Professor Hu was doing. Sun replied, "Here, this is a list of the names of the outstanding archers of the Divine Wolf group that he knows." Un asked Hu how the formation of the special forces was going. Hu replied that it is quite problematic. He knows that a commander is needed to form a military group. Un asked, wouldn't there be enough masters? Hu replied that if it was his personal military unit, there would be no problem. Except when it comes to a divine cult, things are different. There are requirements that must be met. Un said that means it has to be done in order for the military unit to get some benefits from the cult. The operating expenses of the group, the right to use the training field, and the supply of weapons is all that an official troop needs. And they don't have the money for that. So what can they do? Hu replied that the best way was to absorb the pre-existing group, since their divine sun and moon cult not only has a central army, but also other small and large groups. They might try to establish their control over one of them. Un asked, are there any among them at all who could match them? Hu replied that, of course, he even knew them. Un thought and asked him which group was he talking about. Hu answered him, hadn't he forgotten, even though he was one of its original founders. And he's talking about the Four Heavens Gang. Un asked, are these scum recorded as an official group? Hu replied that he had told him so. Though he paid for most of their entertainment, there were times when they were subsidized by the sect. Un said he didn't even know about it. Hu replied to him that it was because the actual manager was not him, but Dan Peng. Un asked, then who is registered as the head of the Four Heavens Gang? Mup Den Peng? Hu replied that he could not be called a leader at all. A better leader would be him, or even Sun. And he doesn't think Dan Peng is competent enough to do that, so he probably hired experts instead. Un let go of his head and said that the problems appeared one after another. And then it was time for them all to hit the road now. Sung asked where to. Un replied that they were going to meet Mok Dan Peng. Hu asked him if he was going to ask him to give him the group. Un replied that yes, why shouldn't he? Hu told him that he didn't realize what kind of person he was. He uses his name to get money, which he spends on girls and alcohol. Does he think he'll just give up his pretty life for nothing? Un replied that if he doesn't give in nicely, they'll make him. They didn't have much time to waste. Hu said then he should have talked it over with Dan Peng beforehand, and they could discuss it together under alcohol. But Un replied that no, they need to go right now. Hu asked him, does he want to go right now without preparation? Un replied that yes, but they should hurry up. Immediately after the conversation, they hit the road. Hu asked, aren't they asking for trouble? Mok Dan Peng is not the kind of person who will obediently make any concessions. Un said he would ask him, upset the kindest of eyes, that wouldn't work? Is that what he's implying? Hu said they should try to get the gang of Four Heavens before he goes out to dinner and booze. Otherwise, Sun will have a harder time. Isn't he right? And besides, they had already arrived. Un came into the house, and without even shouting, he began to pound on the door with his fist. But then the door opened and asked what was going on. Don't let them think this is the kind of place you can just take in. But the old man looked closer and saw a quartered young master in front of him. He bowed and saluted. Un said he was in a hurry, so he banged on the door harder than usual. And he apologizes. Un asked, "Where's Mok Dampung now?" The old man replied that he was taking a meal. Should I give him a message? Un replied that there was no need. He would take care of it himself. The old man said okay then. But Un went to the front doors and opened it with a bang. But at that moment, Pin was drinking by himself alone in his room. But Pin heard the door open. He started shouting that he was saying no one should come in here. And out of anger, he tossed the alcohol aside and shouted that until he had finished his meal, no one should come in. But Un was already very close and caught the jug of alcohol. When Pin saw his brother, he said that Renan had come to see him. And when he looked closely, he said that who was here too. I wonder if it's a coincidence. Pin looked at everyone who came to him and asked to know why he was hanging out with creatures like him, and he pointed his finger at Sun. Un at this moment saw that Pin looked more like a bandit than he expected. He sat down at the table and put his feet right on his food. Pin asked him what he was doing here in the first place. Un replied that Sun may be an asshole, but he's also his right-hand man, so only he can call him that. Pin couldn't stand this conversation and picked up the alcohol and began to behave appropriately at the table. Un at this moment wondered why the past master of this body had chosen a swine like him as a close friend. Pin didn't understand and asked his brother, had he eaten something bad? It looked like coming back from the dead had messed him up pretty badly. Pin picked up his smoking puff and told Un why he had brought his ass here. Into the possession of the Four Heavens gang? Un replied that he was here to get back what was his. Pin asked with surprise, give it back? And like give it back? Un immediately told him to his face to have Pin return the Four Heavens gang to him. Pin didn't like what he said and asked him what he had in mind. Does he want to enter the succession contest? Un slapped his hand on the table and replied that yes. The Gang of Four Heavens would become an official military unit and join the Eastern Star Palace. Pin listened to his brother and suddenly started laughing. He told Un to wake up. He had told him all along that there was no way he could do that, and UN scum didn't have enough professionalism. Un immediately told him, enough is enough. He needs to hear those 3 magic words from him. Let him say that he understood everything. Pin got angry and asked him what did he just say? But unable to stand it, he picked up his pipe and tried to hit Un. But Un did not take cover and simply extended his finger and stopped the blow. He told him to say that he understood, and then he would forgive all his sins. But Pin stood his ground and told Un not to mess with him, and flew at him with his fists. But for Una, he was very slow and easily stopped the punch and said that it was so hard for Pan to say those words. Pin couldn't do anything against his brother and was shocked by it. But Un didn't play with him for long and slapped him. Pei became even more furious after this and asked him how dare he. But Un did not listen to him and slapped him again. Un didn't ask him any more to say a few words and stood over him and started punching him like a punching bag. Suddenly, Pin raised his hand and told his brother to stop. But Un replied that this was the wrong answer. After all, he should say that he understood everything. Pin saw his hand and said he understood. Un asked him again, who is the leader of the Four Heavens gang? Pin replied that Kong Dae Shik was the leader. Un was shocked and asked Kong Dae Shik. In the evening, they took the horses and wondered what he should do next. But Un asked the guys, isn't Kong Dae Shik a member of the Dark Shadow gang, an assassination squad? Who replied that yes, and he's also a high-level master. He also has a bad reputation, which is why he works for Mok Dan Pung under his name. Behind the scenes, so to speak. Un said that for him to be the leader of such a disgusting squad was a waste of time. Sun suddenly got excited and asked, so they're going to go to Shirku's right now? Un replied that no, they would do it later. He was hungry. They would probably visit him a little later. Un saw that when he came face to face with Mok Dan Pung, he almost skated away from his nerves. How could he go straight to an even scarier wolf after that? If he hadn't learned the technique of scale armor, he thinks he would have lost at least his finger a long time ago. Even when he was beating him using the 9 Divine Moons art, it wasn't the most significant damage. From this, we can conclude that Hyok Rin Woon's martial arts are far from perfect. and now he needs to become even stronger. The next day, Pet came to the palace and shouted to Yunu to come out and talk to him. After all, he had recently come to see him while he was unprepared. He had struck a surprise attack from his sneaky side. Un looked at them and thought, what kind of actions on his part did he expect to see if he brought Kong Daeshik here? And then one of the people came out and said that he was here to a gang of losers. And if young Master Mok told the truth, the situation could get worse depending on how they reacted. Un immediately showed up and said that if that's what he wanted to do, it just shows that he's not experienced at all. And it's going to be like this. Pin looked over and told Khan it was him, and let him not listen to anything he says. And he must be stomped on. Mok immediately kicked his foot straight to the ground and said that he would show him what his demonic sex skills were worth. Un was on standby and told him to attack already. And in truth, he didn't think that a high-level master would succumb to the tricks of them, who was even weaker than himself. And now it was a waste of energy and time for him. He asked Khan's leader where his weapon was. Khan replied that if he took his weapon, the guy would lose a limb, and they need him in one piece. But he can use his weapon. Un realized that Khan was looking down on him, so he told Khan that he would then fight with his fists too. Khan replied that the rules of Mirim allowed the weak to use weapons against an opponent stronger than himself, and let him have any of it. But Un replied that it was fine. He doesn't want to use his sword against someone who will fight unarmed. Khan said it's been a long time since their last meeting. The only noticeable progress was that he was scratching his tongue more confidently. And does he think he's as good as his master? And he will grant him the right of first strike. Un realized that as long as the enemy's vigilance was down, he simply had to take this chance. Un immediately ran at him and decided that he would finish him off with one punch. And at the end, he used another technique by messing up in front of his face. Song immediately realized that this was the technique of the Dark Shadow Gang, the Ghost Trek. But how would the fourth young master know the technique of the Assassination Squad? But suddenly he felt that Un would attack from behind and decided to turn around. But he saw that he wasn't there. But Un couldn't resist laughing. But Kong turned around and saw that the guy was already in front of him and wouldn't have time to react. Un had applied the art of the 9 Divine Moon's third technique, the Dark Buddha Palm Strike. Un charged at him with so many punches that his fists slammed into his stomach, and Kanu had no chance to defend himself. Pin realized immediately upon seeing this that he was up to his eyeballs in shit. Kong fell to the ground and couldn't move. Pin asked him how could this happen, but Kong was unable to say anything. Un next pointed his finger at Pin and told him to come over. Pin came up and answered his master that he was here. Un started to say that considering he had called the gang leader himself, so he wouldn't have to go to him himself. Could he consider that he too had expressed his desire to join his new unit? Pin answered him that about that, but Un didn't waste any time and suddenly raised his hand sharply. Pin thought he was going to hit him again and backed up, but Un hugged him and said that he would gladly take him in. And every member of the Four Heavens gang too. Pin bowed his head and said that it would be just as the master said. Un immediately turned to everyone and told everyone to listen carefully. And from now on, they will train hard. They will obey Sin's orders without question. Sin also said it was like they would be like new people from today. The warriors were shocked that this guy would be their coach. And Un realized that they would not be good, but could trust the guy's management. After a hard day, Un came to his manor and lay down on the couch to get some rest. But suddenly his thoughts started to come out, and he thought that he would die today. But who would have thought that his combo of Dark Buddha Palm Strike and 9 Divine Moons art would work right after using the Ghost Gate? And the main problem is that he can only use all of this when his opponent lets his guard down. And against some master, he's not likely to be able to use it. But right now, his goal is to survive so he can go home. A few weeks later, Sun was training the new warriors. The boys were already weak and could not tolerate such hard training. Pin was already unhappy during practice and thought, why did he even agree to this? Suddenly Sin asked them, aren't they going to pick up the pace? Who saw all this and realized that Sun was becoming more and more reliable since he became the deputy leader of the unit. And at this rate, Un could really become the successor. But Un suddenly walked over and told leader not to give those Sachkans a moment's rest. Sun turned around and replied to him that he understood. Un walked over and said that it wasn't easy to run the unit. But Sun was angry at this point and, shouting, asked the students if anyone had allowed them to rest. But Un remembered and said that since he had become the leader of the Four Heavens gang, we should choose a new name for him. How about Black Lion? Doesn't that sound good? Who asked in surprise? Black Lion? This was the first time he had heard such a thing. Un said that their dream is to make the future of the divine cult better. And so he decided to choose a new name to characterize the change. And this is their new symbol. Who was surprised and asked the symbol? When he opened the scroll, he saw that there was a black lion drawn. And he said he had never seen anything like it. But Un realized that he had literally plagiarized the logo from his real life. But the way he sees it, who really likes it? But Un said that they were still very weak, though. That's right, Sun brought about 30 archers with him. But they need at least 100 to be considered a full-fledged unit. But for a new unit like theirs, Un suddenly asked, the demonic pavilion's graduation ceremony should happen soon enough? Who replied that all the geniuses of the demonic cults should gather there. Does he really think they will join them? Un held out the book to him and replied that for that. Yes. Who looked at the book and asked in surprise, is he serious? But Un asked him back, why would he ask what he already knows? Let him just help him find the blacksmith. On the day of the release ceremony of the demonic pavilion, there were a lot of people who had gathered and were very much looking forward to this day. The various units shouted that they were from the Dragon unit, known for their prosperity among all the major units. And today, they are offering all graduates a special interview opportunity and is asking them to come and register. But in the moment, everyone immediately turned back and saw a strange flag they hadn't seen before. Un came with his best warriors who wore masks, and the gear was magnificent and strange. People started asking immediately, who are these people? And they think it's the Black Lion Division founded by the fourth young master. But people said they'd never heard of them. Maybe they're called that because of their black armor. But people couldn't even believe that they had decided to make Black Lion armor. And this is the power of an external member of the Rahu clan. To think that he made an armor made of black iron that is worth like gold. Unnoticed that they were the ones that all the people were looking at. And that's very good for their reputation. But in the evening after the ceremony, they came home and threw off all their clothes. Who lay on the floor and said that he had been to hell and had come back. And also said it was very hard. And he almost died too. Sun replied that after carrying that armor around, he immediately understood why it wasn't used on a regular basis. And being an archer is much easier for him. But who told his friend that they did as he asked, and he thinks it will really work? Un replied that, of course, delivering an intense and clear message. These are the basics of marketing. Who was shocked and asked the message? Marketing? What was he talking about? Un replied that it was about nothing, and they'd better just wait. They will surely get an answer. The next day, Un and the boys went in front of the clan and saw that the area was filled with people. Un asked the guy if he could see. Who asked him, is he going to take them all in? Un replied that of course not. First, he would need to check their basic physical strength and choose only those worthy of staying. In fact, he's going to start a division in Murima, symbolized by a logo from his modern world. Un looked and realized that he was done with his personal division. And now it was time to improve his influence and position within the family. And he's even ready to face his main rival, the second young master, Hek Rinjin. In the evening, Un went to the meeting and greeted his sister and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He realized that he first needed to deal with the one who was planning to form an alliance with the second young master, namely Renwool, the third young mistress. Renwool told her brother that if he was here to beg for his life, she had heard him. Now, let him get the hell out of here. But Un replied that actually, he had come to offer her an alliance. Will said that he had no powerful abilities or authority. The only thing is that he has money from his own family from the Rahu clan. And what did he offer her now? He's a lecherous moron. And after this, he just has to beg her to keep him alive, because it's going to happen very quickly. Un replied that he would do it again. He came to offer her an alliance on equal terms. So he is willing to make her an offer she simply cannot refuse. Renwool waved her hand and said that she didn't want to hear anything. Let him return to the palace of the Eastern Star if his life is precious to him. But suddenly, Un decided to go with trumps and said that the second young master would choose the first young master. And he even noticed that she flinched. Un said that by forming an alliance with the second young master who has no support, she plans to keep the first young master from the Baitian clan in her grasp. But this is actually a mistake, because the second young master had already joined forces with the first. We'll ask him where did he get this information from? Un replied to her that she couldn't say that, and he realized in his head that he couldn't say it, that he himself had made it all up by writing the short story. Val asked her brother if that was why he wanted to be her ally. Un didn't hide it from her and replied that it was exactly that. Val thought about it and said the alliance was on equal terms, but she wouldn't get anything if she made an alliance with him. Un replied that was correct, but what if he offered to make the Rahu clan her ally? Val realized that an alliance with the Rahu clan, the largest in numbers in the capital. But we'll ask him how he can lead an alliance with their Chanyu clan when he is not even recognized in Ra's clan. Un replied that this is only the case now. In the future, he'll make things right, because he's about to go to the Devil's Dungeon. Val was shocked, but knew that this was a place that from its very foundation, in 300 years no one had ever been able to overcome and get out of there alive. And a place where the only thing a man has to do to enter is die. This Cretan thought he'd go there. Val asked him if he realized exactly what it meant to enter a demonic dungeon. Un replied that this was the only way he could show everyone the seriousness of his intentions. So he eagerly waits for her answer, after he returns from the dungeon. The next day, Un went in front of the clan to watch Sun train the clan's new apprentices. But Un remembered that the Devil Dungeon and Training Center built by the third-generation leader, the Heavenly Demon, and to nurture his talents. It was he who laid the foundations of the divine cult of the sun and moon. And going through a dungeon is a very long tradition to become a full-fledged investigator of a demonic cult and gain the recognition necessary for a successor. And this is what he wrote in the novella. Un suddenly grabbed his head and asked himself why he had thought of all this. If he entered the dungeon, the chances of survival would plummet to zero. He simply wouldn't be able to overcome it. If there was a second young master in his place, he would be able to, but it's him after all. But Un pulled himself together and stood up from his chair and realized that everything is to survive. He simply has no other way. He'll do it. The next day, Un immediately set out on the road, and walking beside the rock, he came to the main entrance. But the guard were also surprised to see such people, for it had been a long time since anyone had entered the dungeon. But Un promised himself that there was no way he would die here, and igniting the torch, made his way into the tunnel. After that, Un started to undress and said that he thought it was time. He changed his clothes a little, taking some warm clothes with him. Preparing himself to the fullest, said he was done, and suddenly hearing sounds, I felt they were already here. And the Devil's Dungeon means it's already begun. And the first test is demonic mosquitoes. They sting a man and send him down with their hallucinogenic saliva. And there are several hundred of them in total. And they'll sting until they've sucked every last drop of blood. But Un confidently said that he knew this would happen, so he had picked up the confrontation techniques from the artisans beforehand. Un prepared himself and waited for his moment to start fighting them. But the creatures were already very close to him. But he had thought of everything in advance, and pulling a weapon out of his backpack, he used it against the strange creatures. Un began to rejoice and said that they had not seen this coming. Now let them see his insecticide sprayer. After all that, he looked and saw that the creatures couldn't stand the chemical liquid and all had died. Un said that the second young master handled these mosquitoes with the art of fire. He didn't deal with them as well as he did, but at least he was effective. And it's safe to say he passed the first test of the Devil's Dungeon. At this time in the Murim, the first young master Hecarim Geum came to Jean and asked if he was too sluggish. Jean asked, why should he worry and tear the hair on his head, because Un had entered the dungeon. Geum replied to the guy that he was right, but wasn't he planning to enter it himself next month? Jean replied that he didn't even know himself. It still didn't change the fact that he was already there, wondering what had gotten into him in the first place. Geum replied that nobody cared. That jerk just wanted to die a dignified death. Although it's okay to kill, but when he calls this guy his brother, he gets all giddy. It's just embarrassing. And that was to be expected from someone who had the blood of those wretched merchants running through him. But suddenly Gene didn't feel well and set his glass down on the table. And right after that, things started shaking and the alcohol in the glass was spilling out onto the table. GM saw that something was about to happen. But Gene pulled himself together and said he was apologizing, his tongue lolling out. They are men who have devoted themselves wholeheartedly to the cause of their divine cult, and asked him to refrain from such words. Others, hearing them, might misunderstand him. But GM still remembered his battle with Gene, who had defeated him with a hidden technique that day. But GM was really curious how many people were already aware of how terrifying this weak-looking guy was. Was still in the cave, but suddenly felt chills all over his body. But he touched his ear and realized that now he needed to prepare for the next challenge. But unheated his handkerchief and blindfolded himself, and decided to embark on phantom education. Using his sword, he decided to feel the road and move forward with slow steps, but knew it was the place where every nightmare lurking in the depths of the mind was breaking free. And the fog floating around here plays a role in making these very nightmares seem as realistic as possible. But then Hecarim Gene swept away all that fog with the help of martial arts. In the moment when even a grain of doubt settles in him, or he lets his mind go feral, is considered total doom. Advanced step by step, and said that as long as the Eastern Sea did not dry up and Mount Baekdu was not worn out, this should be the end of it. Removing the handkerchief from his eyes, he looked around and saw the entrance in front of him. It was made in the shape of an arch. He looked at his beads and said that he had once again used a different method from the one used by the second young master. Still, he was glad that the poisonous blood pearl had worked. But he became suspicious of all this and asked if it was too easy. Now all that's left is the third test, and it would be cool if it turned out to be just as easy. But decided to use another way, and upon opening the strange vessel, he smelled the odor and said it stinks badly, and wondered how he could even use it. But since he wants to survive, there's nothing else to do. And now, if he moves it, it should work. He stirred all the liquids and said it better work. He was already too far gone as it was. Put the vessel in front of the entrance and suddenly started running away and wished he could make it work. Hiding behind a rock, he watched the entrance, but suddenly he remembered something and looked at his hand. He decided that he needed to use a ghost hike to avoid unnecessary sound. Also scaly armor to increase his body's defense. Suddenly, slow footsteps began to be heard from the archway, and the ghost smelled a strange odor and walked only on it. Knew they were underground monsters, and he couldn't believe that something like them even existed, and even a peak martial artist would have a hard time dealing with them. Also, since they can't see, they rely only on their sense of smell and hearing. He has applied an ointment that knocks down the odor, and now remains to be still. The ghost must think he's a stinking rock, and there's a bottle next to it that should get his attention. It has a more interesting smell than he does. The ghost approached the vessel slowly and began to smell it. But he didn't like the smell and got so angry that he tossed the vessel aside. Saw this and realized that he needed to act right now. Running, he jumped over it to enter the next round. But himself didn't know what he had put in that bottle, and red chili powder and some volatile substances. But it turned out to be much more complicated than that. Suddenly, was shocked by what he saw and didn't understand why things had gone so wrong. Looking into the cave, he saw that this ghost was not alone, and the others were on their way out. Took form as well, as did the ghosts. He immediately realized that there were far more of them than he had expected, and there must be the whole Adams family here. But was a little smarter and hid behind a rock. But he hoped they would just leave and they wouldn't sense him. But Ghost was very close to him at this moment, and was trying not to even breathe at this moment. But suddenly Ghost looked in his direction and pulled out his long tongue. But it didn't even move and just hoped it would go away. But Ghost felt his breath and angrily opened his big mouth and started screaming. But was also frightened at this moment and started shouting back. After all, he didn't even realize what was going to happen next. But under Yun's hand at that moment found the pistol with which he had killed the creatures and used it against the ghost. But Ghost didn't like that at all, and after that he got even more furious. And he hit me with his huge hand. But Un was a little faster and dodged the blow immediately. The ghost just stroked his hand across the stone. He realized that since things had turned out this way, he would have to fight his way to the exit. But the ghost wouldn't just let him go, and ran after him to devour him completely. Un didn't even look back, and saw only white light in front of him. But the ghost could run, too, and chased after him. Un turned around and said that they were following him by scent, which meant he had applied that disgusting ointment on himself for nothing. But Yunu had nothing to lose, and the only thing left to do was to run away. After a moment, he looked back and realized that his training had not been in vain. They wouldn't catch up with him. But suddenly he looked forward and saw the largest and most heavily haunted ghost in front of him. But this ghost looked like the oldest of them all. Un looked at it and said that it was not how he had imagined it. But Un was no longer afraid of anything, and he only had to strike and run on. He did so and pounced on the ghost with his fists. But Ghost was a little faster and dodged his blow. Un just hit the ground. The ghost didn't like this at all and tried to catch the guy with his long claws, but only grabbed at his clothes. But Un didn't stop to pick up his things and ran on. After all, he wouldn't have that chance again. Un immediately realized that this heavenly demon was very powerful. Not only did he create a dungeon like this, but he also put these fucking things everywhere. But the ghost didn't want to let him go just like that and decided to chase after the guy. Un didn't stop and ran as fast as he could. When he saw the light and the exit in front of him, he rejoiced. But he had no idea what lay ahead. At the last moment, he stopped and seeing the cliff, he said that he certainly didn't expect much since the second young master had easily climbed this cliff. But he asked if it was too deep. Un got angry and started yelling that the sky demon was just a big asshole. After stepping back a bit, he decided to jump and was saying that he believed in himself. Un started to run very fast so that he would have enough speed and strength to jump. But the ghost was closer too, and at the last moment, pointed his hand at the guy to grab. But Un added some speed and leaped over the rock. And Ghost felt only an emptiness in his hand. Un saw the exit getting closer and closer to him, and said he did it. And he was so glad that he had heeded Murian's advice and learned the Dark Wings technique. And when he returns, he should be rewarded handsomely. But at the end, he noticed that he couldn't get to the other side because he was missing a couple more steps. But Un started waving his arms and legs in the air to grab onto something. But he couldn't reach it and fell down. Falling into the cave, he managed to survive and looked up at the sky as if for the last time. He could have died here. When he got his feet, he said he barely survived, all thanks to the technique of scaly armor. And now he had to think about how to climb back up. But suddenly he looked around the cave and saw strange stones not like all the others. Un looked at it and asked, "What is this?" And he didn't even remember writing in the novella about that place, and hoped those monsters wouldn't show up again. He had no choice but to go into the white light, and it was better than just staying in this place and waiting for his death. As he stepped into the light, he saw a huge building in front of him and a huge river that he would have to swim across. But when he looked up into the sky, he saw a tree with apple fruits growing on it, and they looked very sweet. After walking around a bit, he found an easy exit that led him to a building. He looked and said, "Is this really the happy haven, hidden by the rock, that he could only dream of?" But as he stood in front of the door, he saw a mark that looked like a hand. Began to wonder if he should just put his palm here. But Una was not daunted by this, and he put up his hand and large and huge doors opened before him. Once inside, he was shocked at what he saw. There were only stairs in front of him and a statue at the end. As he approached it, he saw that there was a sword and a scroll on a rock that he should probably pick up. He looked closely and saw that even on the stone something was written. It was written on the statue that to his successor, who would inherit his patrimony, he congratulated him for overcoming all the trials of the devil's dungeon. And he is a heavenly demon, created the devil's dungeon and arranged it so that whoever manages to overcome it will inherit his patrimony. So let him make good use of it. But Yuna became more interested in the scroll, and upon opening it, he saw that it was heavenly demonic arts. One of the stories said that there was once a person known as the strongest blessed heavenly demon in the history of the divine cult. But unfortunately, as far as anyone knows, he never passed on his martial arts to his descendants, nor did he leave any record of them. But now everything would change. His heavenly demonic arts have been hidden here all along, and the protagonist finds them. Un was surprised and said that if it was really heavenly demonic arts, then he had hit the very real jackpot, and he would have been as satisfied as an elephant if he had just successfully completed this dungeon. But who would have thought that he would get such a valuable prize? But Un looked a little closer and asked why his handwriting was so terrible. He only understands a small part of it, and thinks he should take it with him and show Secretary Jiang. And taking the sword in his hands, he looked at it and said it looked special. Yinu was very curious and took it out of its holster. From such beauty, Un was in the most intense astonishment and decided that it was a valuable object for him. He said he thought this place must hold divine elixirs and some pills. Overjoyed, he ran out of the temple like a little child and on his way picked an apple from a tree. But fatigue overcame him and he decided to rest for a while. Un sat down near a tree and began to eat. And then he headed to the shore for a drink of water. And to quench his thirst, Un looked around and said that there was only an endless supply of fruit and drinking water. He was really pissed off and thought this man was just greedy, and thought that it was hard to leave at least a couple of useful elixirs. At this moment, elixirs would be far more useful than heavenly demonic arts written in incomprehensible handwriting. But Yinu wondered what else he could find in this temple, and finding another door, he opened with the palm of his hand and found himself in the armory. He was surprised and said that there was a very extensive number of weapons here. 7 blades, 5 short swords, 7 spears, many bows. But at the end he saw some gloves standing there and wondered what it could be. He put them on and said he'd seen something called hornless dragon gloves. They felt like a normal pair of leather gloves, but more supple. Un tried them on and said they fit perfectly. And he even took the mantle to the statue and apologized. Un said that these clothes have remained in good shape for several centuries. This means that it is made of high-quality material. But he thought about it and realized there was enough food and water, so he could camp here until he found a way out. And even thinks this time will be better spent studying the heavenly demonic arts. A few weeks later, the temple doors opened. Un has been here for a very long time and came out with a sack full of weapons. But he said it was very hard for him. And looking at the white light, he said it was time to go back. And he was lucky that it was the blessed demon who described how to get to the exit. And the only problem is it doesn't say exactly where that exit leads. But he'll figure out when he gets out of here. As he moved closer and closer to the exit, he even closed his eyes and said it was very bright. And he didn't even realize where he was. But coming out of the cave, he came across a wanderer who was in front of the cave at that moment. Un asked the wanderer where he was. But the wanderer only said that Mr. Heavenly Demon's successor lord had descended upon them. But Un didn't understand him at first and asked, "What did he just say?" But the old man immediately fell to his knees and began to bow. The old man looked at his equipment and started reciting a prayer saying that these 2 things proved that he was the heir of a heavenly demon. And it was a great honor to meet him. Un was shocked and thought, what else is a heavenly demon robe? And a demon sword? The old man got to his feet, and with a look on his face, turned around and started running. Un was shocked and didn't realize what had just happened. Un thought that the old man would probably soon give him directions on how he could get out of here. In the evening in the city, who said that it had already been several weeks since Un had gone to the dungeon, and asked Sun if he thought anything had happened to him. But the boy didn't answer right away and thought for a while. But Sun saw a crowd of people nearby and asked, "Is today some kind of holiday?" Who replied that he didn't even know. But a passerby asked them, hadn't they heard the news? The successor of the heavenly demon has appeared. And a few days ago, the flag was raised in the devil's dungeon. This is the first time since it was built. The guys were surprised by this and immediately thought it might be Un. Sun ran forward and said that it couldn't possibly turn out that Un had become the successor of the heavenly demon. At that moment, people were carrying Un on the throne, and rejoiced at his new appointments. And Un himself was also happy and rejoiced even more. But Un still couldn't understand why there was someone at the exit of the dungeon, in eternal anticipation of the heavenly demon's successor. But he doesn't care anymore. These celebrations are just a balm to his soul. Immediately after the celebration, Un came to his Eastern Star Palace. Un decided to get some rest and sat down on his throne and said that he was finally back home. And he was pretty tired of it all. Sun immediately went up to him and asked him to tell him what it all meant. And who also said that all Un did was this is being in the dungeon for a few weeks, but turned out to be the successor of its founder. Un thought of what to answer them and remembered all the moments from the cave and the difficulties he had gotten himself into. Un told his men everything exactly and in one piece, and how he got out of there safe and sound. Who listened and said that it was unbelievable. But who would have thought that this kind of secret would be hidden in this dungeon by the heavenly demon himself? Sun also said that it was even mind-boggling. The dungeon was built about 300 years ago, and he's the first to get the secrets buried there. Un replied to the guys that it was very good. He just wanted to lay low and surprise everyone at the end with his sudden appearance, just like in dramas. Who became curious and asked why? Why such a simple goal? Isn't it a great honor for him to become the successor of a heavenly demon? Un replied that the problem is that it's too huge an honor. Because he got this title, he should have more opponents. And he might say he's not fully ready to face them face to face yet. Who listened and said he understood. But Un realized that even worse, not only had he deviated from the main plot of the story by traversing the devil's dungeon, he had also become the successor of the heavenly demon. But then he thought, what would the other young master do? And what should he do now? And how should he go on? All these thoughts tormented him more and more, because he didn't even know how things would turn out next. But Un had come up with a plan and realized that it was not a fact that everything would go according to plan. But it's too late to change anything, and now that it's done, the only thing left to do is to keep going. Un immediately told who to go out and collect some things for him, and let him not forget to give the villagers the silver. Un then turned to Sun and asked how his training was going. The boy replied that the archer rider's training was complete, and after consulting with Secretary Jiang, he was also thinking about training them on how to use daggers. Un realized that if Sun and Jiang Yuryang, a martial arts teaching expert, joined forces, they would create a new direction of knife fighting. They will be able to make a Murim technique similar to modern special forces knife fighting techniques. Un said, that was very good, but let him put aside close combat training for now. Right now the priority was to learn survival skills. They'll organize a meeting tonight, and they'll see everyone there. Also, have him call Peng to the meeting. Who asked, why should he be called? Un replied, because he had a job for Pen. When evening came, they gathered in the meeting room. Pen was upset and felt like he didn't want to see them. And why was he even invited? How could this have happened? But all of a sudden, Un suddenly shouted to bring it in. Immediately, people came in carrying chests in their hands. Murian asked the gentleman, what is this? Un opened and replied that it was the equipment he had taken from the dungeon. And as they can already see, it doesn't look like a normal weapon. If they like something, they can take it. He'll get rid of the rest. Murian asked the gentleman what he meant by giving them all these precious implements. Un replied that no matter how precious they would not compare to their talents. And he too understood that they were precious. But since he hadn't paid a dime for them, he wouldn't mind showing them his generosity. They would not let him down after this. The boys thanked the master at once, who immediately picked up one of the swords while Sun looked out for his bow and checked its bowstring. Un saw Murian thinking and turned to him. But the secretary looked at everything and still could not choose something. But Un decided to help him, and showing him the ring told him to take this. This is a dark dragon ring. It could do the same thing as the blood poison pearl. Murian looked and replied that it was very generous of the Lord. Un realized that he could not allow his best tactician to be poisoned. But he needs to think about how, in general, he's going to be a demonic tactician in a novel if he roars so much. But Beck was still standing aside and could not approach. Un approached him and said that he apologized, but there was nothing for him. But to him, he would give him the task of selling off the remaining celestial demon artifacts for a premium, or the Mock family had always been good with weapons. Beck, with a trembling voice, asked Gentleman, "For the prize?" But Un was surprised and asked him why he addressed him in you. Still, he realized he had to sell what he could. The next day, Vol came to the Murim and walked around the grounds. Vol thought, did Un really become a heavenly demon heir after passing the devil dungeon? Un met his sister and said that he welcomed her. Wol was surprised and asked him if he had come uninvited again. But Un didn't talk to her for long and held out the locket. Wol took it and said it was the seal of the Rahu clan. Had it gotten to them already, she asked. Un replied that, of course. Her brother always keeps his word. And now it was her turn to make a move. Vol realized that she had doubted for nothing, but there was no way she thought this would happen. She said the Devil's Dungeon was one thing, but how did he get recognized by the Rahu clan? Un thought for a moment and replied that, to be honest, he actually realized that he didn't care at all that he was the successor of the heavenly demon. But he was somehow able to gain his acceptance through a precious gift, priced like the gloves of a hornless dragon. But Un didn't tell her everything and told her not to worry. He only wants to have an alliance with her, not the Chanyu clan. Vol remarked that the brash man reminded her so much of Ren Gina or Aboni. She said she accepts his offer of an alliance. Un made a sign of thanks and replied that he wouldn't wait for her help, and very happy that she had chosen the right option. In the evening, Jean went up to his room and, sitting by the window, said that Un had entered into an alliance with Wol, and now he must be taking this race seriously. But putting her hand on the windowsill where the light falls, she began to burn. He immediately felt intense pain and pulled his hand away, and teasingly said that the head would probably be angry with him. That same day, a guy was climbing one of the mountains. He was full of strength because with every step he was getting closer and closer to the top of the mountain. But the bright light revealed that it was the main character of the short story, and his name was Tae-Mu Kwan. He said that he hadn't seen sunlight for a very long time. But he didn't stop long on a mountain, and running down, he decided to go see how the world was doing. His strength was unbelievable, for he had descended the mountain so quickly that he had not even left a trace of him. But Kwan was a little hasty in his travels and found himself in the forest. But when he looked around, he didn't understand where he was going. But Kwan heard a strange sound in the distance and ran there, saying he would ask them where he should go next. I mean, he's been wandering around for 2 days with no purpose, and he should find someone to help him with that. But at that moment, there was a gang roaming the woods, attacking and killing civilians. But Kwan didn't even realize it, and with both feet, he leaped into the enemy's territory and charged at one of them right in the head. Kwan apologized and said he couldn't slow down and wondered why this guy was even standing there. The man asked him who he was. Kwan replied that he was a little lost here. He hadn't even eaten for a few days, so he asked the bandits if they had any food. But the thief wouldn't listen to him and attacked the guy with his sharp sword, asking why he was lying to them. Kwan didn't even expect such a greeting, and seeing the sword in front of his face, he immediately dodged. But he didn't feel sorry for him and immediately punched him in the stomach with his fist. The thief didn't even have time to see it and only felt the pain. Kwan said he only wanted to ask them for some food before he went on his way. But since he came across the bandits, he couldn't just pass by. One of the Christians began to shout to him that he was a good young man, and if he defeated these bandits, he would reward him generously. Kwan was surprised and replied to him that he hoped the Christian would keep his promise and treat generously. But the bandit leader immediately ordered his men to kill the upstart and put him in his place. Hearing such an order, the bandits began to run at him with their sharp swords. But Kwan used his obtained dragon technique at the last moment and waited for the moment to attack. But the bandits didn't even know who the guy was, and they all jumped and screaming for him to die. But Kwan took a few steps back and waved his sword a few times to finish them off. Christian was shocked, for he saw that this fellow had defeated all the bandits with one blow. But suddenly Kwan fell to his knees and clutched his stomach. Christian immediately went over and asked the boy what was wrong with him. "Is he hurt?" But Kwan cried and replied that he just wanted to eat. His stomach hurt a lot because he hadn't eaten for 2 days. Then the Christian immediately brought him food and began to feed him as he had given him his word. But Christian watched him and saw that he had shabby clothes and martial arts not appropriate for his age. And he's definitely some kind of master who came down from the mountains after years of studying martial arts. A Christian came up to him and said his name was Gongsun San, and could he ask him where he was going? Quan replied that he was on his way to the Murim Alliance in Hubei. But he was a little lost, for he had gone to the wrong place. Sin immediately told the boy that they were going there too. If the wanderer doesn't mind, why don't he go with them? They would provide him with food and lodging. Quan was happy about the offer and said that was great. And now they could shake hands. Sin asked the guy if he could ask him how old he was. Quan replied that he turned 30 this year. But Christian said he was too. Then they'll dispense with the formalities. This was actually the first meeting between Quan, the protagonist of the novel's hero's journey, and Gongsun San, a merchant and Christian who would become the leader of a group of the Central Plains' finest traders from the Wedge Forest Group. In the evening, there was a feast in the Murim, and the soldiers made way for the new guests. And at the head sat on his throne, unwatched with his menacing gaze, and knew that today was the first official start day of the Black Line Division. And coincidentally the day he would be recognized as his leader. But suddenly Vol and his men appeared in front of him. Vol said that the reason he invited her to the inauguration of his personal squad was to let the second young master know of their alliance. Is he sure it's worth it? Un replied that their alliance will be known sooner or later anyway. It was a great opportunity to attract those who hadn't changed their minds yet. Will said she understands him, but Jean Oraboni is no ordinary person. Un answered her that he knew that too. But suddenly he heard someone shouting at him that he was a fool. Un immediately looked up and saw that a new guest had come to see him. Vol looked at this guy and knew him, for her gaze immediately changed and became even angrier. The guy immediately hugged Juan and said that he couldn't believe that the youngest among them had become the successor of a heavenly demon. When did he have time to grow up like that? Un started laughing and replied that he was a long way from him. Will realized that he was here to restrain Un. But that wasn't all, for there was another man standing in the road who had also come to the inauguration. Henema suggested to Un that they should already start drinking until his nose fuses. Un replied that then they would have to drink until Henem's nose grew back together. But suddenly Jean came up to them and put his hand on Yuan's shoulder. The boy immediately felt the man's strength. Henema turned around and told Jean that he had come too. The boy replied that as a member of their divine cult and as his older brother, he heartily congratulated Una on such a day. And this tomboy had earned his respect. It was the rival of the novel's protagonist Quan and the second young master Jean. Un realized that he was far from his level, and no matter how much he tried, there was no way he could defeat him. Un bowed and replied to his brother that he was flattering him. It was very nice to see him in person. But Jean said that he should be the one to say such things. But it was time for them to go. Un realized that no matter how hard he tried, he was the only one he would never be able to defeat. And if his goal wasn't to stay alive in the war against protagonist Quan and return home to his world, he would definitely obey the second young master. Soon, who was leading with the entire ceremony, and said, "Here comes the end of the inauguration of the Black Lion Squad." And so he asked for their attention, or to proceed with the long-awaited auction of demon weapons the world hasn't seen in over 300 years. All the guests were amazed and said that the opportunity to get one of these is once in a lifetime. And are they ready to pay? Who asked his friend, how does he like their faces? Un replied that it was a heavenly demon tool. No wonder the members of the sacred cult wanted it so badly. After all, you would want one too, right? Who proceeded and said that it was time to start the auction with the heavenly demon quadrangular halberd, and the starting price is 1,000 taels of silver. Un watched everything and saw that who was doing a great job. If their attention was on him, he would get a bonus. Suddenly one of the guests said he was giving 100,000. One of the old men raised the bet and gave 102,000. When Murian heard such a bid, he also realized that everything was going according to plan. And then who stepped in and said that if no one breaks this price, the halberd will go to elderly of the Mahan family. And after waiting for a few seconds, he showed that the weapon was sold. A few hours later, Hu brought out the box and said that here was the last artifact. Miriam continued and revealed that it was the heavenly demon bracelet that deserved the future owner's attention the most. All the guests were in awe of such a beautiful piece and even drooled over it. And then Miriam said that the starting price of this item was 500,000. The guests did not expect such a big price and started thinking. Un immediately calculated that 500,000 taels of silver was almost like 1,000,000 won. And now it remained to listen to their suggestions. The guests began to ask, isn't this just a trinket? It's not even a tool. Who would give so much? But at that moment, everything changed, and one of the guests raised his hand and said he was giving 5 million. Hearing these words, the guests were shocked and looked at Jean. But Un also didn't expect the elder to make such a move. Miriam said that the second young master bid 5 million and asked if there would be other bids. Who didn't wait any longer and said that the divine demon bracelet was sold to the second young master for 5 million. All the guests rejoiced at this and started clapping for the second master. Jean also stood up for propriety and accepted congratulations. But one at this moment didn't understand why he did this. Even though it was a heavenly demon relic, why did he spend so much money on an ordinary bracelet? It's 1 billion won. Miriam immediately walked up to the second young master in front of everyone and handed it over personally. And Jean accepted his purchase and immediately put it on his hand. But Jean was a little shocked at his feelings after putting on the bracelet. He felt as if something had entered his body, and a huge demonic ancestor sword suddenly appeared in his hand. Jean himself didn't expect such a thing to happen and looked at it all with surprised eyes. The guests saw it all with their own eyes and looked at it with their mouths open. And they said that the bracelet had turned into a sword. And now Un realized that this was no ordinary bracelet. But how could he miss such a moment? After all, he had put it on his arm and nothing had happened. Jean said he bought the bracelet because he liked it, and it turns out to be his sword. Suddenly, he pressed the sword hilt, and the object transformed into its initial form as a bracelet. Jean suddenly said that he didn't think he was worthy of it. Un replied that no, divine things could recognize their owners. And the owner of the heavenly demon bracelet is none other than his second brother. Jean said that since that's the case, then he promises that he will become as worthy as the owner of this bracelet. The guests began to cheer and started shouting congratulations to the second young master. Glory to the second young master. Un realized that this would be best for him. While all of the audience's attention is on the second young master, he needs to prepare for the next step. And now, the race for success has begun. It's time to start the main game. After all, everything was going according to his plan. But at the place where Quan was born, strange people arrived on the mountain. And one of the men told the chief that the following people said that someone had crawled out of this cave. But the man in charge looked and said it was too late. He was ordered to send a notice at once if anyone left his seclusion, and immediately ordered his men to immediately alert the main group. After the inauguration, entering the room, Who said at the table that a rumor had spread that the second young master was the true heir of the heavenly demon. But Miriam apologized and replied that he should have paid more attention to it. But suddenly Un opened the door with his foot and asked the boys to help him, because the books were about to fall down. Who helped him and asked him what it was. How was he? Because of the bracelet. Isn't he worried? Un replied that he didn't need the bracelet at all. If he had known about it, he would have sold it for 3 times the price. Who was surprised and asked his friend if he would have sold it anyway. Un replied that it seemed to him that the bracelet reacted to the user's chi, and it would only activate if the chi level was at or above the level of the second young master. Even if he left it behind, he wouldn't have enough inner chi to use it. Un at this moment, in his head and inside himself, he didn't know how he would fight the main characters in the form of Hyok and Woon, but he would prepare thoroughly just in case. And it just would have been better if the second young master was slightly distracted by the incident. But suddenly someone threw a scroll on his desk, and he asked, "What is it?" Who replied that an urgent letter had arrived from a group of Donbai merchants. Un opened it and saw that the letter said that the man from the cave had already left. But he knew that the main character Mu Kwang had to come out after 2 years of training. And now the Divine Demon Festival was still half a year away. But why did he show up? After all, it's still early days for him. Are his actions affecting the events of the novel? Unthought. And now he would have to think about whether there was any way to postpone his death at Kwan's hands. After the conversation, Un went to his room and looked in the mirror. But he kept repeating that he was Lee Si-woon. And now he realized that such a third-rate novel could definitely change. But the forest was not resting at this time, and several fugitives were running away from the guy. They didn't even realize he was one. 2 hours earlier, bandits had gotten into other people's territory and started laughing at her and saying she was just a doll. And she must be a master, because a normal sleeping pill wouldn't knock her out at all. But he managed to put her to sleep with a stronger one. But suddenly Kwan comes up to them and asks the bandits what they are doing, and from what he could see, clearly nothing good. The men turn around and asked what kind of clown was this. He better get his own way. And the two of them attacked him. But Kwan didn't understand anything and told them why they all say and do the same thing. Is this what they're all taught at school? Kwan didn't play with them for long and pulled out his sword. And with a single blow, he broke their weapons into 2 pieces. The bandits fell on their heels and didn't realize what had just happened. One of them asked, "Why is this guy so strong?" But Kwan asked the guys how he could wake her up. The bandits threw a couple of vessels at him and started running away. But Kwan initially didn't realize anything as the vessels suddenly broke and pink smoke appeared in front of him. The bandits started laughing and said that this poison could kill a bull in one blow. But Kwan was enjoying the air at that moment and just breathed. But the tears started coming down his face more and more and coming out through the smoke. He asked the guys, "Did they put pepper in it?" The bandit was shocked and said it was the master. No poison works on him. And now they definitely need to get out of here. Presently, Kwan did not let them go unpunished and began to pursue them. The bandit looked back while running and shouted to the master to spare him. But Kwan didn't do that and threw the strongest punch. Kwan was so fast that the bandits didn't even realize how they had said goodbye with their lives. The guy told them they shouldn't have pissed him off while he was being nice to them. They must have something to wake that girl up. But Kwan didn't leave the girl alone and decided to wake her up by using a strange substance. But suddenly he heard someone looking for him and called his name. But Sin found him and asked him why he had disappeared so suddenly. And he knows Kwan can fight, but he's not good at navigating. And when he saw the girl, he asked, "Who's that?" The girl came to her senses, and Kwan asked her if she was okay. There are a lot of bad guys in Murim, so let her be more careful next time. The girl replied to the guy that she was in his debt. Sin suddenly turned to her and asked if she was the goddess of the divine moon. Kwang asked in surprise when he heard this, "The goddess of the divine moon?" Sin answered him. Did he remember telling him about someone who taught the villains of Jianghu a lesson? Kwang looked at her and said that she was that goddess of the divine moon, right? The girl replied that it was an exaggeration. But the goddess immediately turned around and ran away, telling them that it was time for her to go. But Kwan decided not to let her go and immediately stood in front of her. The girl was shocked and didn't realize how he had gotten in front of her so quickly. Kwan decided to introduce himself to her and get acquainted. The girl was thinking at this moment, who was he? But she didn't hide her name and answered that her name was Su Yeon. But Kwan suddenly turned to her and said that she was a lady of strength, and since their meeting could be considered fate, how about having dinner together? Yin didn't refuse him and replied that she agreed. At this time, Sun was at war and overpowered a group of warriors and told them to inform the squad leader. And he would finish off the remaining members of the Red Scorpion squad before returning. The warrior replied that the order would be obeyed. After the battle, Sun took the horses and headed home to his homeland. After all, it had been quite some time since they had left. In the morning, Un asked his friend, "Is Sun still finishing the rest of them?" How thoughtful. If they get rid of the remaining fighters, the entire western zone will be free. Who replied for sure. This would be their first achievement after coming to the central headquarters of the sacred cult. Un thought of the Black Line Division at this moment, and he didn't have high hopes for the Murim Special Unit, but they exceeded his expectations. And because of them, he has a better chance of survival. Suddenly an elder came to meet them and said that a letter had come from the cult leader for the leader of Una's squad. Un got down on his knee and replied that he accepted the letter with gratitude, and he realized that he was already tired, and these letters were no use at all. He wished he could rest already. Un opened the letter and realized that he was expected at the castle tomorrow, and he would have to go to the meeting. But in the evening, Un wondered why his brother had summoned him to the castle so suddenly. He must have recognized something. But Un realized that he couldn't know that he had become possessed, or the whole plan would be ruined. A year after the Heavenly Demon Festival, the devil cult will go to war with the Murima Union. Un will die around that time, so he needs to get home before that happens. But suddenly Un decided to pick up the survival plan book's secret weapon. And as he picked up the pen, he realized that he had to think of something. That night, Un and everyone else came to the castle, which was at the mercy of the strongest man in the world. Un knew that it was the strongest among the sacred cult leaders, Rinmoon. But suddenly, the old man came out and shouted for them to salute the guards of the sacred flame. The eldest brother told the others to salute the ruler of the sacred flame in charge of their entire sacred cult, and to the most grateful creature, the ruler of all living things. Suddenly, Rinmoon raised his hand and said that enough was enough, and there's no need for such formalities between fathers and children. Let them pass and drink tea with him. Un exhaled and realized this was not what he expected from the leader, and all 5 of them gathered in his room. Moon said he was alive. He had already told him how hard it was to put on that holy flame robe and not to stress about it, but he didn't care. Moon turned to the boys and asked how they were doing, and holding out his hand, he even told Un to show him. The boy was surprised and asked, "Show me what?" Moon replied that he let the sword of the heavenly demon pull out. He called out to him because he wanted to see him. Un was surprised and said that was right, and gave Moon his heavenly demon sword in his hand. Moon raised the sword above his head and said that this was the sword of the heavenly demon. He decided to test it by using one of his techniques. The guys were a little surprised at such strength, and even the wind rushed around them. But Moon said he already understood, and it must have been hard for him. Un wondered if Moon was talking to the sword. And does the sword really have a consciousness, he thought? Moon handed the weapon back and told Un that it was a good sword and let him keep it safe. Un decided to test his hunches in action and asked the sword if it would speak, and let him answer. This is when Jean decided to show off and walked over to his father and told him to look at it and show him his bracelet. When Moon saw it, he remembered and said that there was also a bracelet. He decided to check it too and put on his arm. Suddenly, he immediately felt incredibly strong. But it went away quickly, and Moon said that it doesn't work. And it seems that only Jean can wield it. Can he recognize his master? Jean told his father that he tried to ask people to activate it, but they couldn't get it to work either. Suddenly Vol told his father to tell him now why he had gathered them all together. Moon replied that as many of them know, the Heavenly Demon Festival is approaching. In addition, this time there is its successor, so he would like to increase the scale of the festival. And now he proposes to bring in some incredible talents from the families of their divine cult this time around. The eldest son was surprised and asked his father what he was talking about. Does he want to invite talents from other families? Moon looked at him with his evil gaze and asked, "So what of it? They don't have a monarchy. Anyone in their cult can become a leader." Suddenly, Un told his father that he had a proposal. Moon decided to listen to his son and replied to tell him. Un said he would like to invite families from across the Central Plains to attend the festival. Everyone was shocked at his words, and Moon asked what was the reason. Un replied that even though their powers were suppressed by them, they still didn't know when they could betray them. And for them to be their subjects for sure, they must show their allegiance to the cult. Moon thought and said he liked his son's suggestion and asked the others how they felt about it. Jean replied that he thought it was a very good idea. That way they would show both authority and generosity. Moon immediately stood up and said they've made up their minds. Managed to turn an unnecessary formality into a great opportunity. He likes it, and there's not much time before the festival. As they walked out of the castle, Un noticed that Jean was looking at him. Suddenly, Jean said that it looked like the festival would be fun this time, and after saying goodbye to the others, he said they would see each other again. Vol asked Una He knows they'll have to bring the warriors back from the border, doesn't he? Un replied that he had a plan, so she shouldn't worry. He realized that although the situation had changed after he left the Devil Dungeon, he knew that the cult leader would change the scale of the game. And he added another participant. And so a month before the festival, a wagon came to Murim, and all the people shouted that it was the king of the border. Vol was on the wagon at this point, and said that she has had a lot of tribe here for hundreds of years, and now there's a king here? Un replied that the Kukshan region of the desert used to have a thriving civilization called the Kukshan Kingdom, and there was nothing to stop it from returning to its former glory. Will said that if this is the Kuchesh region, then the Asana tribe must be living here? Un replied that was correct. The Asen tribe has been amassing wealth and power here for many years, and now over 36 desert tribes are their allies. Un understood that originally, after the Heavenly Demon Festival, a king from the Asana tribe appears and becomes a strong assistant to the second young master in the future. And now he needs to recruit the talent who will be the first to become king of the frontier and plan his future with him. But Vol said that if it is Sana's tribe, Un must be talking about Azmeth, right? And it's probably the wolves of the desert. But Un thought and answered her that he was not sure. A week before the Heavenly Demon Festival, many people gathered in the Murim, and everyone knew each other and chatted. Un looked at them and said that wherever Jean goes, he always gathers a lot of people around him, not even to say hello to him. But suddenly all the people turned around and looked at the new guests and participants of the festival. Moon came out to meet his guest and greet him. The guest saluted and said that for the good of improving relations between the Asana clan and the divine cult, he is the Blue Wolf, Azmeth, and himself wishes to participate in the festival at his invitation. Moon brought 2 glasses of alcohol and said that he welcomed him to the cult. Wool and all the people looked at them, and she said he had no trouble finding common ground. And since Un is going to convince him, but turning around, she looked and saw that Un had already messed up and asked where did he go. Suddenly, Un stepped in front of them and called Azmeth a wolfman and said that he had once heard that wolfmen were not bad fighters. Azmeth replied that he was here as a guest and suggested that the fight be postponed for another time. Un pulled out his blade and asked was he scared, and now as he sees it, he is no longer a wolf, but a dog. Vol was shocked at what she saw and asked what he was doing. Azmeth answered him to shut his mouth while he was still kind. Un immediately decided to attack him and asked, Azmeth, what does he think this is going to make him shit his pants? Let him play with him for a while. Azmeth made the decision that he needed to return the favor, so he launched an attack as well. But Un was faster and dodged it. Un began to cheer for this battle and said that this was what he was talking about. Azmeth didn't slow down either and started attacking back. But suddenly, Jean stepped in and stopped both attacks from both sides. He even closed his eyes because he didn't want to take it anymore. Un was surprised that his brother was already here. Jean made his brother fall down and told the others to get him out of here. Un started yelling at Azmeth that he was just a dog, and he's not done yet. Have security let him go, and he'll kick that dog's ass. Jean told his guest that he deeply apologizes for such disrespect from his brother, and asks that Azmeth forgive him. He did it in a fit of emotion. Azmeth replied that he understood that Un might have gotten drunk at the banquet, and Jean didn't have to worry about that. Vol looked at her brother and said what a rascal, and thought, what did he come up with this time? After the ceremony, Un said that alcohol is strong. He had a little too much to drink and got into a fight, and he was about to go on as planned, but suddenly he saw that it was the same girl, Lady Asanasera. Asanasera saw him too and asked, is he the 4th young master? And she knew that he was the youngest son of the cult leader, known for his unacceptable behavior. But after passing the Heavenly Demon Dungeon, he became known as the Heavenly Demon's heir, but judging by his behavior. Sarah told the guy that she had nothing to talk to him about and said goodbye. But Un replied that it was hard for Azmeth to become king of the desert, and he knows she's worried about it too. Sarah says she doesn't understand where he's going with this. Why does he even care what she's going through? Un replied that Azmeth is a consummate fighter. He fights for justice, is brave, and nothing can stop him. These are all characteristics of a warrior. Being a king is different, and if he was a good king, His little provocation wouldn't have caused him to bare his sword. And he thinks she, not Asmit, is worthy of the desert throne. Asmit eclipses her in fame. It is only because of her, not him, that the Asen clan has become a powerful tribe. Sarah wondered and asked him what he was talking about, and why her to the throne in particular. Un replied that he is the son of the leader of the divine cult and one of the official members of the Rahu clan. He will help her become the queen of the desert. On the same day, somewhere in another city, Quan and his girlfriend went out to eat. But a guy with a sword came out to meet them and shouted at them to stay away. And if they make another move, he'll slit that finger kid's throat. Quan asked the guy, why doesn't he just give up and let the kid go? The guy replied that he told them to stay away. He would kill him. But Quan decided to do something different and picked up a coin and threw it with such speed that it hit the guy's hand. Then Yin didn't stay away and ran at him and grabbed the boy so she wouldn't get hurt. And then Quan said that now they would go back to the Murim Alliance and talk about who he was. But Guy got really angry and taking off his clothes and showing his body told Quan that he wasn't going to get off that easy. Quan looked at this and was greatly surprised. He didn't even know who this guy was or what kind of creature he was. But Guy at that moment expanded greatly and his body started to evolve. But Quan shouted to the lady and told them to take cover. The guy turned out to be not simple, that even Yin was shocked at what she saw. But the guy couldn't stand it for long, and it was like he exploded after his evolution. But Quan didn't attack him anymore and just stood still and tried to dodge the blast. Suddenly, Yin and the boy came out through the smoke and looked at the boy's place where he stood and saw that all that was left were bits and pieces and a broken road. Quan said that they were cursed, demonic cultists, and asked what they up to. The evening before the day of the festival, all the workers would prepare table for the guests and set everything up with food. Un turned to his grandfather and said he thought it was time to call a day and asked why so much food. The elder replied that among the guests would be the young master himself, the heir of the heavenly demon, and this feast was an offering for him. Un remembered and said that was correct. Of course, the heir, after the fight at the banquet he had caused, he had become good for nothing again. The elder told him not to worry. Un thought he would admit that he had overdone his plans, but he had achieved what he wanted. And his image of Una is not as important as the image of the king of the border. Plus, the second young master will relax after his antics. But suddenly a maid came and told the master that he had a guest. Un turned around and asked with surprise, "Guest?" Turning around, he saw that a lady had come to him. Sarah greeted Master Una and bowed. She immediately took off her mask and asked the master how he was doing. The guys were all surprised and thought she was very beautiful. Sarah said she had come to find out how he was going to defeat the second young master in the challenge. Un noticed that she got straight to the point. As he expected, she was no ordinary person. And to conclude, Sarah went on to say that the alliance with him needed assurance that his plan would definitely help defeat the second young master. Un raised his hand and, beckoning to his man, replied that of course his plan would work. He opened the box in front of her and said, "This is it." Sarah was shocked and asked him if he was joking. Un replied that it would help him win. And on the morning of the day of the Heavenly Demon Festival at the trial site, Un did his training by covering his eyes with a handkerchief. Un looked around and realized that everything was going well. As it was in the novel, they went to the mountains east of the Red Mountain. He actually knew how it was going to go, so he started preparing long before the festival. And he doesn't have to compete with him. All he has to do is get more tokens and he'll win. Sun asked his friend if he was sure it would work. And how did his conversation with Renwul go? Un put on his ammunition and replied that she said she would handle everything. Just let him believe him. Sun understood that Un was able to pass the test in the Heavenly Demon Dungeon. And he had prepared a lot for all of this, so there was no reason not to believe in him. But Un started looking at his equipment and noticed one box and decided he could use it. Setting off, Un told his friend that they should be on their way to the first location by now. At night, they were already at the site of the trial, and there were already 3 days left before the trial. At this time, one of the warriors was in the forest and fell into the trap of the second young master. Jean approached him and asked him where his tokens were. The warrior held them up in front of him and replied that here they were. But Jean decided to reassure him and told him that there was no need to be so afraid. If he stayed out of his way, he would be under his protection for the rest of the ordeal. The warrior was surprised and asked, "Really?" Jean replied that they were members of a divine cult. They have no need to spill each other's blood. And he gave the boy his helping hand. That same afternoon, Vol was also in the woods, and she wasn't alone. The boy shouted to the young lady to run after him. But Wool was shocked and thought, was this really what Un had warned her about? Earlier, Un had told his sister that there would surely be a survival test at this festival. On it, they will steal fire tokens from each other, and the one with the most will be declared the winner. And most of the cult members only develop martial arts. They don't know about the dangers of the mountainous terrain. And so it would be a good idea to bring a guide who is good at the surroundings, not martial arts. Wool said a guide of the mountainous surroundings who is not good at martial arts. Un said that more. If they were to be separated tomorrow before the trial started, then let her go north no matter what. Wool saw that she was wrong to bring a master from the Chanyu clan as an assistant. She thought the trial would be a no-holds-barred fight like 30 years ago. But now she needed to move north as quickly as possible. At this time, Jean and his older brother sat in the tent and looked at each other. Big brother said exactly 46 tokens. But Jean replied that Un and Wool hadn't come yet. The elder asked, "What's there to worry about?" He was very lucky to escape from the heavenly demon dungeon. He has no talent or fame. But it was hard for Jean to say that the first person who had managed to pass the heavenly demon dungeon in the past 300 years was just lucky. And Un had definitely prepared something, but what was it? Eldest told his brother that he saw Un get drunk at the banquet and get into a fight. He hasn't changed. But suddenly the warriors shouted to the chief and called them outside. The elder came out and asked, "What is going on?" The warrior replied to the older man to look over there. At that moment, someone hung up the bunnies, but they were all dead. The older guy got really pissed off and told them they were retarded. And when he cut the ropes, he asked, "Are they really that pissed off about rabbit carcasses?" The older man said they had free food now, and why were they whining here? But Jean thought the whole thing was strange and went over to the rabbits to watch. He realized that they had managed to hang the rabbits in the tree without his knowledge. And now it's some kind of warning. For the morning, Un and Sun looked at the tents and sat behind the trees. Sun asked the captain if the trick with the suspended animals would work. Un replied that they definitely wouldn't leave them unnoticed. He knew from a novel Renjin would use the trial as an opportunity to gain the cult's trust. So he's working with the wrong people for the assignment, even at the cost of mobility. Sounds like a good opportunity. The night before, they had hung a beaver from a tree, which failed to stay on the rope and fell right in front of Jean's feet. Jean realized what he was doing and thought, what would I do next? So he decided that he would go and look around. The older man asked, "Is that necessary?" As long as they are here, people under threat of death will bring them their tokens. If there is any concern, he can send a squad of hunters. Suddenly, Jean turned around and saw that there was a fire in the forest. He immediately ran to the spot and said he would go and check it out. Jean arrived at the scene of the fire at the same second. He saw that all the tents were on fire. It all seemed strange to him, and it looked like they were under attack, and thought, why did Un remove the bodies and set the fire? But unless it was a trap. But he still felt the danger, and at that moment, an arrow flew at him. But Jean swept everything in advance and easily grabbed the arrow with his bare hands. But he even saw that an arrow had been sent at him from the bushes, and the scoundrel was already trying to run away and hide. Jean didn't run after him, and pulling out his sword, he sent her straight into the bushes where the attack had come from, and made the place dust. But Sun was faster and immediately jumped out of the bushes and started running away. Jean saw him and immediately chased after him, but also felt someone attacking him from behind and easily repelled the attack and realized there were more of them than he thought. Jean said he was getting angry. He went back to his house without looking any further. Going into the tent, he asked if anything had happened in his absence. The elder replied that not at all. Let him tell what had happened there. Jean replied that he thought someone had attacked the camp, so he went to check it out. He was attacked by 2 archers. The elder was surprised and asked, "Archers?" who would bring archers here with them as assistants. He doesn't know who it could be, but he doesn't understand their motives. Jean replied that he was really pissed off by the showdown with the archers in the battle. The elder told him to forget about them. Archers are only good for scouting, nothing more, or in a real one-on-one fight. The one who controls the fight better will win. But Jean took the evidence and held a black arrow, and it was made to attack the field, and whoever used it had definitely prepared it for some kind of test. He didn't even want to think that Un was doing it. But suddenly, a warrior came in and told the second master that he needed to see it in person. Jean came out and asked what had happened, but he saw his sister Val in front of him, who was no longer in any condition. Jean asked Val what happened. How did it happen? Will simply replied that Un threw her and passed out. After that, he sent her to Captain On to have her examined. And an hour later, he came and asked how Wool was doing. Captain O replies that she is still feverish and keeps mumbling about some kind of poison. He thinks they need a doctor to find out about an antidote. Jean thought, did Un really betray Wool? Suddenly, he heard from the other side of the dwelling that someone shouting that a monster was approaching. The guards were very scared and yelled at the monster to leave and stay away from them. Captain O immediately ran up to the spot and, punching the guard, asked what the hell was he even talking about. The guard replied to the captain that there was a monster in there. Jean looked at them and saw that they seemed to have the same symptoms as Val. But what was going on here anyway, he thought? But hallucinations and outright delusions. Indeed, more like fever than poison. But then what were those blisters on their bodies, he thought? But looking closely at the guard's hands, he immediately noticed that they were mosquito bites. But after that, immediately most of the arrows were aimed straight at their shelters and tents. And everything immediately caught fire in a flash. A couple seconds ago, Un said that he had gone back to the celestial demon cave and brought back mosquito larvae. And upon opening the box, he said that they had grown very big. Sun asked the captain, will he use this pride again? Un put on his hood and replied that all means are good, and it was time to get on with it. As they got closer to the tents, they camouflaged themselves so that the effect would be much better than they hoped. Un opened his box and said that they would then only have to wait for the chaos to begin, and the first check of the heavenly demon dungeon. All of Jean's men were hurt and in shock and didn't even know what was going on around them, and the tents were already burning with yellow flames. The older man got very angry and asked what was going on here, and those who haven't gone crazy yet, have them start putting out their tents quickly. Jean looked and said he was afraid it was all Yuan's doing. The elder was surprised and asked, is this rascal behind all this? But he said it was time for them to leave. It would take too much time and effort to bring these crazies back to normal. But suddenly a guard ran and told the commander that the center tent was on fire. The elder ran over there and said that their fire tokens were lying there. Everyone immediately went to the center tent. But Jean replied that he had to get Val out first, and immediately ran to save his sister. The older one saw that Jean wasn't going to help him and started yelling at him, asking him what he was doing. Let him leave her. She didn't do anything to them. What matters now are the tokens. Jean went to the room where Wool was supposed to be lying, but found only an empty bed. He asked where she had gone, but Jean took it all in and realized it's just as he thought. Wool and Un are on the same side, but Un had also made his headquarters, where only his men were. They sat around the fire and discussed further plans. Un looked at the box and said there were only 46 tokens. But Wool was angry and told him that if he made her do something like that again, she would kill him. Un replied to his sister that he was apologizing to her, but that was the only way to distract him. But Sarah said that all they had to do was hide the tokens until the challenge was over. But Un replied that no, that wouldn't be the end of it. And now the second young master will spare no one. Will set Un is right. Jean won't leave it like this. But Un suddenly said that the most crucial times had come. This time, Princess Sarah would have to prove herself. At this time, Jean was surveying the casualties and seeing his men screaming in pain asked, "Where's Henham?" The older man replied that he went after the third young lady. But Jean said that they had lost precious time because of that. And they still have 2 more days left. They still have time. But Jean suddenly told Zhu to keep an eye on things. He'll go get the tokens himself. Zhu replied that he understood everything and the order would be obeyed. In the meantime, the boys found an abandoned house for themselves and all rested. But suddenly Sarah asked Master Un to explain the plan in more detail. Un said that he was sure the second young master would find the place very soon, but it would only be a trick to make him lose them. Val asked her brother, "Is he trying to get him in here?" Easier said than done. After all, the older brother is very cautious. Un replied that his own caution was what would ruin him. Sun was surprised and asked the captain what he meant by that. But Un did not tell them everything and told them to rest for the time being. The morning would be wiser in the evening. Sun looked at the captain and asked if he had fallen asleep. Val got up too and said she wouldn't understand how he can sleep so peacefully. She doesn't even know if it's a good thing or not. Sarah realized at that moment that she had never met a man with that type of thinking, not even in the desert. Maybe he could help her dream come true. Un pretended he was already asleep and knew that if the story was to be believed, Princess Sarah was weak in front of her brother, and he would play along, hope she was on his side. But Un was tired because he was having a hard time with all this. But Jean had already found the place where they were resting and was watching from the tree. Jean thought that Un had managed to build a base here before the test. But suddenly the door opened and Sarah came out of the house with the box. Jean was shocked to see Lady Sarah come out of the house. But Sarah told the second young master that she knew he was here. And there is no one here. She is here alone. Jean marveled at the fact that Lady Sarah was alone in a place like this. But he's sure it must be Yuan's ploy. Sarah said she wanted to make a deal with him. If he would help her, the desert tribes would help him. Jean listened to her, and he did not believe her words. As long as Azimeth was there, she couldn't do what she wanted, so there could be no tribes. Sarah threw all the tokens on the ground and said that if he didn't believe her, she could prove her words to him. When she opened the door, she showed the bodies of the guys who had tricked Jean, and they were all lying unconscious in the house. Jean wondered if Un and Wool were there, and even thought she had poisoned them. Sarah said she showed him all the evidence, and he didn't move. And now she thinks he's not one of the wisest. Only untrustworthy people help people like him. Jean came down from the tree and said he wanted to talk about the deal, and asked her if she could give command over an entire tribe. Sarah replied that it will be once she becomes queen. Jean said she wants him to help her become the ruler of the dynasty after winning the challenge. Not Asmita? Sarah replied that, generally speaking, the fourth young master was the first to suggest such a deal, but she declined when she heard his plan. And after she put them to sleep, went in search of him. Their original plan was to put him to sleep and keep him locked up until the end of the ordeal. And now the sleeping pills were wearing off, and she just needed someone's help, whether she was the winner of the challenge or not. And Jean was just the man to do it. Jean replied that it wasn't a bad choice, but could he ask her one question? Didn't she offer this deal to his brother? Sarah realized she was caught and immediately ran away. As she ran away, she shouted to Hayok Rinjium. Suddenly after her shout, a group of warriors ran out of the forest and surrounded the second young master. Jean saw them and told Hennim he wondered where he could go. But Hennim said he couldn't win, and the future of the divine cult was his. Jean accepted his brother's challenge and answered to prove it. Hennim immediately ordered his men to attack him. But Jean was one of the best Murim warriors, and using her new sword ran to fight the traitors. His one attack was so strong and powerful that the warriors couldn't even get close to him and all died. But behind them, Hennim was already running with his attack. Jean realized that his brother wouldn't let him go, so he continued his attack. In the center of the battle, they directed their attacks from different directions, but no one even knew who was stronger. But the explosion from the sword strikes was so strong and powerful that they were thrown in different directions. Jean stared into the smoke and waited for his brother to attack again. But then he looked closer and saw that no one was there, and he wondered where they had all gone. Jean started to look around, and even saw that all the tokens were gone from where Sarah had thrown them. Jean immediately said that he knew it, but he didn't think it would go that far. He didn't stay there and headed for his tokens. At that moment, Un stood up and said that just as he thought, he was definitely not going to be able to deal with him one-on-one. But Wool was not happy about it, and said that his plans would bring them to their graves. But Un said that if it wasn't for his plan, they wouldn't have been able to fool him. Sarah came to and asked the master, "How is he?" And she thinks he still has some poison in him. Un replied that he was fine. It would have been different if the antidote hadn't worked. But Sarah now realized that the master had the betrayal of the first young master on his mind. But good thing the plan worked. First he offered the deal to Jium, and then he brought Jean too. Un suddenly said they didn't have much time. It's time to move out. At this time, Jium was howling in the forest, and even the tokens were with him. But he realized that he only needed to survive today. But he can't underestimate Jean at all. He'll probably catch them all overnight. But suddenly he heard footsteps and stood up asking who was here. And then only Jin's red eyes were visible from the forest. Jium asked his brother how he was so fast. Jium answered his brother and said that he would give him one last chance. Jium realized that there was nothing he could do against his brother, and kneeling down, he reached out to the token and asked him to forgive. But Jean picked up the box, and upon opening it smelled the odor immediately and tossed the box aside. Soon this smoke turned into fire. Jium himself was shocked and didn't know how it could have happened. Jean said that it was Wu's and his pranks again. But suddenly he heard a strange sound and looked up at the sky and said that it was a rocket signal from the west. But he hoped that Un was no longer in the camp. And on the morning, Jean came to his camp and saw Un sitting on a rock waiting for his brother. Captain O fired the master and said that the fourth young master said he would burn the tokens if they did not call on him. At this moment, Un held fire and tokens in his hands. But Jean realized that his brother had decided not to hide until the end of the ordeal and just called out to him. I mean, he's all alone here. Captain O continued that the master would set them on fire too if the master approached him. June asked his brother what he wanted. Un replied that just as he thought, Jean Henham was more understanding than Jium Henham. But the second master actually thought his brother was just a stupid bully, but he didn't know he would pull it off like that. He should have underestimated him. Un said that he, in his hyung, wanted to propose a deal. June was surprised and asked with surprise a deal. Jean realized that if Un just wanted to win, he wouldn't be called to join him. Un said that he was sure his brother was worried about his big sister wool. But Jean replied that it was too early to count on his victory. There was time to slit his throat and find her. Un realized that his brother was definitely out of his league. He knew it wouldn't be easy. If he didn't stop, he might as well kiss his head goodbye. Un remembered that in the novel, Jin's character is pretty straightforward. He's quiet, polite, but won't hesitate if someone gets in his way. He's the master of the demonic sect. Un told his brother that if he killed him and took the tokens, he could be sure that he would be the winner. But whether the 6 clans would support him was another matter. And Un knew that his only weakness was that there was no one behind his strength. Behind Hyok Rinjium, the Bukshin clan. Behind Hyok Rinwool of the Chanyu clan. Behind Hyok Renon of the Rahu clan. And Hyok Rinjina's mother was from a clan that was feuding with a demonic sect, so she couldn't support him. And his only relative, Hekrin Jie, couldn't support him either, as he maintained a neutral stance. But Jean only has his own power. No one can help him. But the other problem is that after the second young master won the trial, the 6 clans that didn't recognize him as the sect leader tried everything to take him out. And Jean, who was trying to overpower the 6 clans, soon decided to purge the members of the 6 clans. But during this, Quan, the protagonist, infiltrated a divine sect to become a follower of a heavenly demon. And now one knows that it's not easy for Jean to shed blood. If only there was a way to persuade the 6 clans without spilling blood. And he's sure that the second young master would have chosen the second way. Jean looked at his brother and said he was talking about the 6 clans. Suddenly Jean lost his temper, and it really hurt him to show his power. Un was shocked and thought, what is this? He hoped it wasn't the second young master he wanted to bleed very badly. Un realized one thing at that moment, that if that was the case, that meant he had miscalculated everything. Un immediately realized that he had taken a big risk by relying on the plot of the novel, and now things were not going according to plan. But suddenly Jean turned his sword into a bracelet and calmed down. He didn't kill his brother. Seeing this, Un was shocked and didn't even understand why he had stopped. Jean turned around and told Captain He to go without him. Leaving them alone, Jean told his brother to tell him everything. Un was surprised that he'd been so quick to control his rage. The main villain had been expected to be less than that. Un told his brother that he wanted to make an alliance with him, and then he would have the support of the Chanyu clan and his Rahu clan. He would be virtually guaranteed victory with the support of 2 of the 6 clans. Jean replied that he didn't trust him, and he's already got the support of 2 clans. Why would he need his brother's help then? Un replied that he had no goal of becoming the heir to the divine cult. And Un even remarked that one mistake, and it would all be for naught. But he said that if he got possession of the border, Hinem would get a divine cult. The desert tribes still oppose the divine cult. If it dares to enter the Central Plains, they will be in trouble. Jean asked his brother, so is he ready to take responsibility for this difficult situation? Un replied that he did. Frankly speaking, he doesn't care about the Central Plains. And on the border lay the vast deserts, beyond which lay the western regions. The sacred lights of the cult even appeared from them. So if they want to ensure the growth of the cult, they need to keep a close eye on the border. Un wondered afterward if he had said too much. He panicked so much that he started talking without thinking. Now the die is cast, and there's no turning back. Jean told his brother that his plan sounds credible, but he sounded sincere. Un immediately realized that his naughty tongue be damned. Jean continued that if his brother had nothing else to say, he would probably take the tokens. But Un is frightened and starts shouting to his brother not to kill him. And he asks him, and he doesn't want to die? Even if he becomes the heir to the divine cult using tokens, he's still screwed. Jean asked, didn't he say he had the support of 2 clans? Un replied that he did, but he wouldn't become as strong as his brother. And alone, he is powerless. Jean said, already sounding more convincing than what he'd said about the border. Is that it? Un replied that he also wants a guarantee of his and Vol's safety, as well as high ranks. Jean asked, does he think he can kill his siblings? Un replied that there is more than one can encounter in a cult. Jean said he agreed and asked if there was anything else. Just then, Un pulled out a piece of paper and said, also this. Jean was greatly surprised and replied to his brother that he knew this would happen. Un started laughing and replied that you can't be overprepared. But suddenly Jean said that he had his own conditions too. Un asked in surprise what were the terms. June replied that his brother had said he wanted power over the border, and now he wants his brother to leave it at that, and when he becomes cult leader, he'll be with him. Un hadn't expected this and realized at once what his brother wanted from him. But June said he would need his help and his skills, and as a token of his trust, let him accept this as a gift, and handed him the bracelet. Un was surprised that his brother just took the legendary item for 2 billion and gave it to him. Un decided to refuse and told his brother that he could not accept his gift. But Jean stood his ground and told him to take it. Un received the bracelet from his brother and said he was giving him tokens in return. Jean asked, is everyone here? Un replied that he didn't. And, signaling to his men, he told his brother that Will also had a bundle. He warned her to burn them on the signal. Jean asked, what if it doesn't burn? Un replied that there are an equal number of them. They will still have to fight. Jean looked and told his brother that he was bright. Suddenly the warriors surrounded them at once. Jean immediately looked at them and displayed his strength. His strength was so powerful that everything shook around him. But Un was also surprised, for this was an ambush. And how could he fall for Jin's ruse? And now he would end up like this. Jean didn't take the tokens for himself and used his powers to burn them all to the ground. Un was a little surprised and didn't know what would happen next, but asked his brother why he did it. June didn't answer him anything and just pulled the tokens out of his clothes. Un asked his brother where he got Vol's tokens from. June replied to his brother that he had a good plan. However, he had plenty of time to find Wool. Un was surprised, since it took his brother so long to find her. June told him not to worry. Wool was safe. He only wanted to hear his confession. But time flew faster and faster, and June said the sun was already setting. Un was glad that the ordeal was already over. When he arrived home, he thought and said that everything had gone according to plan until the festival. He still felt sick somehow. If he showed up in the Central Plains like this, that damn Mu Quan had already killed him. But of course he has an alliance with the second young master, but he is in no way allowed in the Central Plains. Un remembered that in the novel, Un had been on the side of the second young master. But with the inheritance, the latter had begun to avoid him. But to be helpful, he offered to lead a troop into the Central Plains, and soon met up with Mu Quan, not expecting to meet his death there. But because he had changed the course of events at the festival, he didn't know how the plot would develop further. His enemies could attack him at any moment. Suddenly, Hu came and asked the commander why he was still here. Un asked him in reply, "What's wrong?" Hu replied that the commander had said that he would attend the Black Lion Squad's general training today, and if he is tired, let him not overwork himself. Un replied that he didn't. He really should go and see the results of the training. He realized that because the Dark Lion troop would increase his chances of survival. When you meet Mu Kuang. At this time, Sun was conducting a training session for the new recruits. Un approached him and said hello to the trainer. Sun, upon seeing him, immediately shouted to the recruits to pay attention and meet the commander. Un saw how they acted and realized that Sun had done a good job. He told them that it was a great job. Next, Sun gave them orders for them to continue practicing. Un looked at everyone and noticed that Pen had improved greatly. Un stayed for the entire training session, and after a few minutes, he saw one of the warriors showing off his knife-wielding techniques. He became very curious and thought, "What is this?" But the warrior saw the commander and immediately stopped and said hello. Un told the boy to let him look at his blade. The warrior replied that, of course, and held out the knife. Un examined this knife and thought, "What is it?" And it looks like a modern military knife. Un said this knife is very similar to a regular blade, but the shape is different. When he asked to make blades, did he say to make a brighter and a hole on it? He replied that I don't think so, and maybe it's not made correctly. Un asked if he knew who did the blades. He replied that he had ordered from a forge that an elder in the hall had introduced him to. He would clarify about it. Un said we must find the master who made this blade. Immediately, Hu replied that he would look into it and find one. But Un thought that maybe someone else from his world had gotten here. At this time, there was a conversation with his warrior in the first young master Jiam's dwelling area. San Wool of the Petition clan asked Jiam. Jean still became heirs by surname. Jiam got very angry and slammed his glass down on the table and said it was just nonsense. But Vol said there was no other choice and would have to fight the second young master. Jiam answered him that this is nonsense. He knows about his power. What kind of suggestion is that? Wool replied that the second young master is a loner. No one can help him. No one's going to go after them just because they've decided to fight him. Jiam asked, so he means he wants him to send assassins after him? Vol asked the guy in response, does he think Jean can be stopped by just an assassin? And pulling out the vial, he said there were more substantial methods. Jiam replied that his brother would never fall for poison. Vol said he had gotten this crumb the hard way from the West. According to the people there, it came from very far away, beyond the western deserts. Jiam replied that it wasn't about the power of the poison. If he didn't think ahead, he'd find out about the poison. But it occurred to Vol and asked, what if Un, the fourth young master, poisoned him? Jiam was surprised and asked the boy, does he want to pit them against each other? Vol replied to the first master that he was catching on. If the relationship between the two deteriorated, the clans supporting them would be embarrassed. Jiam asked, so does that mean he wants to quietly gain control of the divine cult? Vol replied, that exactly. And of the clan will definitely support him. Also, if things go differently, there will be at least one neutral clan that can help. And more importantly, inheritance is not recognized by title, but by the recognition of the 6 clans. Jiam got excited and said it would be useful to know. Vol told him that he would never leave him. When he became the leader of the divine cult, he shouldn't forget who raised him. Jiam started laughing loudly and replied that, of course, he would be rewarded handsomely. He ordered the servant to bring more alcohol, but Jiam got to work sooner than expected. After giving orders to Vol, he immediately sent the mercenaries straight to the second matron's house. Stopping above the master's room, they drilled a hole and released a string through it, and through it they let the poison directly into the master's mouth. The mercenaries saw all this and thought they had succeeded, but they suspected it didn't work, for the master didn't even move. One of the mercenaries thought he would wake up in time, Was it really that easy? But he didn't care, because as long as his squad Darkwing didn't find out, they should get rid of the traces of the fourth young master and leave. When they arrived at the fourth master's house, they didn't realize they were trapped as they suddenly began to be attacked with arrows. The mercenary immediately drew his sword and asked who it was. But then the warriors stood in front of him and put the sword in front of his face. The mercenary recognized the Dark Lion's men, and he wouldn't have thought that the allies of the fourth young master would attack them. And now he needed to report it urgently. But it turned out to be much worse, for Vol, the third young lady, was heading towards him right now. He realized he was surrounded, and they must have been aware of their plan. And now he had no choice. And, shouting, he gave his word to the Naho clan. But suddenly, someone attacked him from behind, and the mercenary immediately fell to the ground. And it turned out to be second Master Jean, and said that it looked like Un wasn't lying. Vol said that if they were late, they would fall for the scheme of the first young master. Jean replied that she was right, and it was very good that they had anticipated the poison option. Everything was just as Un had warned. But Jean thought, how had he gotten all this? Well, had ordered the warriors to take him to the Chanyu clan, let him find out what it was like to be questioned by their clan. Jean suddenly asked, what about Un? Will replied that he went to the first young master. Jean was surprised and asked, all alone? Vol replied that actually, but closed her mouth and didn't continue. At this point, GM asked, is there any news? Vol asked him back, what was he so worried about? They would all know soon. GM said that Un and Jean humiliated him, and they will pay for it. Will started laughing and replied that there would definitely be news soon. Suddenly, someone attacked GM with arrows and let it go straight to his head. But the first master ducked his head and didn't expect such a thing. GM immediately got angry and started yelling and asking who dared to do that. Un was on the roof at that moment and replied to his brother that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. GM looked at him and said it was Un, and asked him if he was the one who tried to sneakily kill him like that. Un replied that correction. He was the first one to try to do it. GM was surprised and didn't know how his brother could have known about the plan. And it couldn't be. Un said that some rascals took a chance on Jean. By coincidence, his men were walking there and ran into them. GM immediately stepped forward and told his men to disperse. And he came down to fight his brother. GM told his brother that he didn't realize who he was messing with. He had been kind enough to ignore his insolent behavior. But today he crossed the line. Un replied to him that this is when they will find out if he really crossed the line or not. GM told him to shut his mouth. He pitted his brothers against each other, taking comfort in drunkenness. The world is at peace with his antics. GM realized that even if he was caught afterwards, he would still kill him and blame all his shenanigans on him as well. With the power of the Baitian clan, even a lie could become the truth. GM didn't waste any more time and immediately attacked his brother. Un was surprised that the attack was so fast that he didn't even have time to see him. But after such an attack, there was an explosion that didn't show if Un had repelled it. But GM thought that his brother was already dead. But suddenly Un emerged from the smoke and went to attack his brother. He came very close and struck with his fist. GM didn't even have time to see that punch and only felt the intense pain from his fist. But he didn't stop after that. Instead, he got even more angry and ran to attack. After making a few swings with his sword, he already thought his brother would die from this. But Un noticed that his brother's head was spinning. After dodging all the attacks, Un stayed in one piece. GM didn't like all this and asked him why he was jumping. Doesn't he know how to fight? But Un told his brother that in his opinion, he was the only vegetable here. But GM caught the moment his brother was close and tried to kill him with his sword. But Un was smarter and used his bracelet to summon a demonic sword and made a huge cut in GM's chest. GM was exhausted and was bleeding water, saying how a weakling like him used a sword technique of such strength. Un replied that he had worthy mentors. Vol, seeing this, started shouting that the fourth young master had attacked the second young master, and gave a swing to his men permission to attack. But Un didn't run away and picked up his sword and said that he hadn't had time to practice, so he wouldn't be able to adequately calculate his strength. Un drew his second sword and told his enemies to lay down their weapons immediately and no one would be harmed. But the enemies did not listen to his words, and now they would have to sweat. Un saw that there were more of them than he realized, and decided to use his speed and catch them on the counterattack. The enemies were shocked at this, and asked where did he go, but Un was behind them at that moment. And without giving them any slack, he went through them like a speeding train and cut them in two. But suddenly he was a little distracted, and the enemy was already behind him and was in a moment of attack. But Un had time to anticipate this and stepped aside to avoid being attacked by the enemy. The enemy shouted that he was missing again, but Un was already behind him, and coming closer, he tried to attack. But the enemy had time to turn around and begin his attack. But Un disappeared again, and his ally was in front of him, whom he cut down. Vol looked at all this and was shocked by what he saw. But Un decided to end it all and said that he had never used his new technique, but he had been lucky enough to fight a weak opponent. Vol saw him in front of him and wondered what he was. How could an idiot like him gain such powers? Un replied his studies used to be really bad, but his last year revealed a secret talent in him. He immediately charged from his fist straight at Vol's head. Next, Un called his warriors and said, "Who dares to trespass against Jean? Let them take him to Jium as a prisoner to be tried." Sin was also on board and said that he didn't know that the squad leader possessed such skills. However, he was told that the first young master was the first to achieve perfection in martial arts. Un replied that it was all pills. He wasn't particularly good at fighting, so he gained his strength with a couple of 9-petal demonic pills. Sin was surprised and asked, "Demonic 9-petal pills? Aren't they only given in duplicate to cult leaders?" Un replied that he did. He made a deal with the leader and got them in exchange for the heavenly demon's weapons. Sin asked in return for what? Does he realize that it was the treasure of a heavenly demon? Un replied that he didn't need it anyway, but the clan leaders would benefit from it because it represented the beginning of the heavenly demon, and as a relic for the clan leader, and for himself, a limitless source of chi enhancement. Kills 2 birds with 1 stone. Sin asked what 2 birds? But then Jean came in and asked his brother if he was okay. Un said hello to his brother and replied that he was fine. But Un thought, what's the matter? He normally wouldn't ask such questions to his second young master. But in the novel, the first young master's Taki began a few months later. And after the attack, the second young master is massacred. But since he intervened, perhaps his character has changed? How much history will be changed by his actions? In the morning, they set out immediately. Un said that Jium had left Urumqi. Was there any reaction from the Baitian clan? Who replied that no, he wasn't. Un thought that Jium wasn't signaling. His alliance with Jean and Wool would become stronger in such an environment. Who asked the commander, is he sure he's okay? He just can't understand. And thought one wanted to defeat the second young master and get the inheritance. Un replied that it was more complicated than it seemed. Getting the inheritance wasn't the end. It all depended on how much strength he could muster. Murian said it right. Getting the inheritance is not victory. It's a victory to get a power that is not inferior to the second young master, who must become the heir to gain the advantage in the end. Who asked Una if he had really envisioned all of this? The commander replied that yes, it was nothing special, and he actually wants to save his own skin. If he got the inheritance, it will be more difficult. If the other young master handles all the risky stuff for him, then he could then concentrate more on avoiding Mu Kuang and finding his way to the real world. They were suddenly surprised and hoped it would be like that. But Yuna did not like it and wished they would not gawk at him. Suddenly, the driver said that they had already arrived at the place. Un got out to look around and replied that this is where the place was. At this point, they headed to an abandoned building where many blacksmiths were working and making their orders. Un was surprised because he hadn't even seen the forge before, and it looked so cool in real life. A blacksmith came up to him and asked him how he could help. Un showed him the knife and replied that he had come here to find out who had made the weapon. The blacksmith was surprised and asked, so they had come to talk to the maker? He immediately shouted to Cole and told him to come over. Cole turned around and appeared to be a girl. She asked, can it wait? Un was shocked that this war knife was made by this woman, and her outfit was definitely not traditional. And standing next to her, he started thinking, why is she so tall? Is she a supermodel? Maybe she's a foreigner? Un asked her if she spoke English. Cole replied that she didn't understand a word and was thinking in her head, what is he talking about? Unrealized she wasn't talking, and now he was ashamed. Cole asked the guy why he was looking for her. Replied that he was with a question about that knife. But Cole suddenly became angry and grabbed his clothes. Didn't understand what was happening or why she was doing this. Cole started going off on him and asked if he had a problem with it. He can't use a weapon made by a woman. Does he have religious beliefs or something? Why did he even come here? If he doesn't like her modified knife, he can sell it, donate it, throw it away. She doesn't care. Unthought, did she really improve on his design? Had he told her not to say that this blade, she had made it herself? Cole answered that it was herself. Any complaints? Unreplied that he would pay 3 times her current salary. Cole was greatly interested in this, and she asked triple. Unreplied that if she became the personal blacksmith for his squad. A few days later, was strolling through the manor and entering the forge, he turned to Cole. Cole went outside and said she made the bow on his orders, and he could try it out. Looked at it and wondered if she had made it herself too. Now that was something he could ask her to make her firearm, although it will be impossible because he certainly can't explain how a firearm works, but thinks that even with this weapon, his chances of survival will increase many times over. Said that nothing less was expected of her. Cole replied that it was a valuable experience for her to make new weapons too. But also said he's thrilled to have a block bow at times like this is awesome. Cole at first glance seemed to her that he was cold because of his stern expression, but if you look closely, he's really nice. At this time, Mu Kwang's squad was resting in the mountains and in the forest. It was very hot that day, and it was difficult to move around. He took a Dalian sword master from the Wudong sect named Li Mun's son into his room. He also found himself a renegade Jegal tribesman named Jagal Sipin, and a minor master of the Kunlun sect named Ban Riyom. But suddenly, San came running to them and said that he thought they should go to Sichuan, and they should move out already. Sipin replied that he knew it. It had been a while since the appearance of the supposedly demonic sect leader, so why the hell did they need this map? Sin said that first of all, Jagal said that they could have already left. Sipin suddenly got angry and started yelling and saying that they were ugly. Sin asked, isn't he also from the Jegal family? Sung said that then the Chungchong Corps would defect to the Murim organization. Sin replied, ironically, they said they would be the first ones there, and here he goes. Sipin went up to them too and said, how those freaks from the Chanshan Corps pissed him off. Sipin immediately turned to Quan and asked what they should do. Quan woke up and replied that they would go to Sichuan. Sipin was surprised and asked what, and said that it was clear to everyone that it was a trap. Sung replied that it means they definitely won't die in there, right? Which was expected from and Kwang Hyan. Quan didn't say anything to them, and coming to his senses after his sleep said that it was time for them to move out then. As they set off on their journey, they forgot San, who was running behind them and shouting for them to wait for him too.